It was a chilly night in early March. This happened a couple years ago now. I had just gotten home from work. I was working late that night, so it was close to midnight by the time I walked through the door. I was beyond exhausted. I wanted nothing more than to crack open a freezing cold beer and throw my feet up on the couch. So that's exactly what I did. Alcohol always tastes better after a hard day's work. I didn't even turn on the TV immediately. I just sat there on the couch with my eyes closed and my feet elevated, trying to ignore the nagging thoughts about how stressful my life was. I remember getting frustrated while flipping through the channels because nothing was catching my eye. After sifting through for another few minutes, I ultimately gave up and opted to enjoy my beer in silence. Like everything else in my life, peace and quiet was apparently too much to ask for, because not 10 seconds later, all the lights in my house simultaneously shut off. You know that slightly fuzzy popping sound that comes a split second before everything shuts off? Yeah, there's nothing I hate more than hearing that noise. For whatever reason, our house had a tendency to lose power every so often. Now that I think about it, it still does. Anyway, my first reaction was to step outside and see if any of the neighboring houses were affected. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, trying to preserve any heat that I might not be able to get back should I fail to restore the power. It was late, but I remember seeing at least one house on my block with their lights on, which confirmed that my house was the problem. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that this headache would definitely spoil whatever pleasure I was hoping to salvage from the night. I turned back to go inside, but when I turned the handle on the front door, it wouldn't budge. I froze, confused at first. I tried the handle a few more times, but it was definitely locked. What the hell was going on? I banged on the door and called my wife's name, thinking maybe she had woken up without me realizing. There was no answer. I tried to peer through the glass, but it was still pitch black in there. I ran around to the back. That door was locked too. I started panicking. My wife had a tendency to leave doors unlocked, so it was weird that the back door would be locked in the first place. I ran around to the side of the house to check the breaker, and I froze in my tracks. My hose, which I knew for a fact had been coiled, was laying in the grass just below the breaker box. The realization hit me like a freight train. Someone had cut the power intentionally. Without thinking, I sprinted to the nearest window and desperately looked inside one more time. This time, I was able to make out two flashlights swinging around wildly in the dark, as if two people were rummaging through my house. They were. I knew they were stealing shit. I was infuriated. The nerve of someone to do this while I was literally home. I reached into my pocket to call the police, only to realize that I had left my phone on the couch. After cursing under my breath, I told myself I'd just run to the neighbor's house and borrow his phone. As I started making my way to the nearest house, another, more sinister thought hit me. My wife was still inside. She was probably asleep, vulnerable to whoever was in the house. I couldn't leave her there, even for another minute. I sprinted back to my house and frantically grabbed some loose rocks from the yard. I started chucking them at our bedroom window, hoping to wake her up. After the third rock, she opened the window. Before she had a chance to say anything, I quietly told her what was happening and instructed her to hide in our closet. Her head disappeared immediately. She didn't ask questions. I then sprinted to my neighbor's house and banged on the door. I explained what was going on as quickly as possible, and then I used his phone to call the police. I waited on his porch, praying that my wife would be okay. The police eventually arrived, and I ran out to one of the cars, explaining the situation as best I could. They barged into the house, but by then, it was too late. The back door was wide open, and whoever had broken in was gone, with too many of our valuables to count. My wife was more shaken than I was, and understandably so. What she told me and the police made me angry at myself for not doing a better job at protecting her. To this day, I'll never forgive myself for leaving her in the house with potential murderers. Apparently, mere seconds after I instructed her to hide, she heard someone kick the bedroom door open. The person walked into the room and cocked a gun. He stood there motionlessly for a few seconds, clearly listening for anyone in the room. She said she had never been more terrified in her entire life. I believe the intruders heard me throwing the rocks at the window. The scariest part is that we still live in this house, and we're not planning on moving out anytime soon. Sometimes I think about what could have happened had I not stepped outside for those brief moments. I've always lived in the shadow of my older brother. I'm not bitter about it, but it's just been the truth. He's got a successful business, and I've been trying to replicate that for the better part of 6 years now. I recently moved back in with my parents to try and find some footing. Going back home definitely felt like a step backward, but I didn't have many options. I was staying in the basement to keep out of their way as much as I could. It wasn't too bad down there, it was almost like a mini apartment. The basement had its own little kitchen, bathroom, office, bedroom, and even a TV with my old video games. With all that, I rarely went upstairs. I could pretty much live down there on my own, and it kept me from feeling like a total burden. One night, it was either Friday or Saturday, there was a pretty nasty storm blustering outside. Rain was hammering against the windows, and the wind was strong enough to rattle the whole house. I can't overstate the intensity of it. It was one of the wildest storms I had ever seen at that point. My parents were out of town for the weekend, so I had the place to myself, which was fine by me. I remember it being extra cozy down there that night. I love listening to a raging storm from the comfort of a warm bed, especially when it's late at night. There's something about hunkering down inside during a chaotic storm that really eases my mind. I was about to fall asleep to the soothing pattering of rain when the power suddenly went out. Everything clicked off at once, and I was left in total darkness. I groaned, annoyed at the inconvenience. I figured the storm must have knocked out the power, and for a second I thought about going to check the breaker, but I didn't feel like dealing with it. Not with the storm raging outside. Besides, I was about to go to bed anyway, and I didn't really know where the breaker was to begin with. I figured I'd just wait it out and deal with it in the morning. As I lay there, trying to get comfortable again, I heard something. A loud, unnatural thud against one of the basement windows. It sounded heavy, like something had hit it hard. My first thought was that maybe a branch had come loose in the wind or a tree had fallen, but the sound was sharp and deliberate, not like anything I'd heard before. As lazy as I wanted to be, I couldn't ignore a fallen tree. That was a bit of a step up from a simple power outage. Reluctantly, I got out of bed and grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to make my way over to the window. The basement was pitch black, and the only sounds were the rain pelting the glass and the low rumble of the thunder outside. I remember rubbing fuzzies out of my eyes to try and wake myself up a little bit. I held my phone up to the window, squinting through the glass, and nearly died from my heart stopping right there. There was a man's face pressed up against the window, and he was staring in at me. His eyes were wide, his skin pale and drenched, and for a split second, he made direct eye contact with me. As soon as he saw me looking, he moved away from the window. I stumbled back, almost dropping my phone in shock. What the f*** had I just seen? I felt my heart starting to race. I could barely breathe, but I didn't have much time to process it because a few seconds later, I started hearing another sound, the sound of footsteps. I listened closely. The floorboards above my head were creaking gently. There were people in the house. Between what I had just seen and what I was hearing, I was on the verge of losing it. I was home alone and my house was literally getting broken into. On top of everything, one of them knew I was in the basement. I couldn't think clearly with how severe the situation was. Everything was happening so fast, but I had no choice but to act. I quickly checked my phone, ready to call the police. But then I remembered that power outage had knocked out the Wi-Fi, and with no cell service in the basement, I was trapped down there, totally cut off. I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for these people to do whatever they'd come to do. I tried to calm myself, thinking through my options. I couldn't let those strangers just roam around my house, but I definitely didn't want to confront them head on. I was literally stuck in a lose-lose situation. I decided I'd try to sneak upstairs, skip out the front door quietly, and then call the police once I was outside. I didn't have another choice. Keeping my footsteps as quiet as possible, I made my way up to the basement stairs. I still remember the pure fear of that moment. You never know how your body's going to react to something traumatic until it happens. When I reached the top, I peered around the stairwell. My heart sank because I saw 3 figures with flashlights moving around my pitch black house. I watched them for a few seconds, literally petrified. One of their flashlights panned across their body just long enough for me to make out what one of them was carrying. It was a gun. I froze. Every muscle in my body was tense. I didn't move. I just watched as they murmured to each other in low voices. That's when I heard one of them say something that escalated the situation even further, if that was even possible. In a calm, almost casual voice, one of them said, "Alex is in the basement, go find him." I can't describe the terror I was feeling. How the fuck did he know my name? I backed down the stairs as quietly as I could, trying to keep my breathing steady, but inside, I was losing my shit entirely. I knew I didn't have much time. They were coming for me, and I had no idea what was going to happen once they found me. I looked around frantically, considering potential hiding spots. There wasn't time. I needed to get the hell out of there in the next minute, or I was going to die. The only possible way out was through one of the basement windows, but they were all sealed from the inside. I had no other choice. I grabbed a nearby stool, climbed up one of the window wells, and smashed the glass with my elbow. Shards of glass flew everywhere, but I didn't care. I scrambled through the broken window, pulling myself out into the rain. I felt the cuts all over my body, but I didn't have time to register the pain with the adrenaline and fear coursing through my veins. The downpour soaked me instantly, and I ran through the mud, trying not to slip. Once I was a safe distance from the house, I finally got a signal and called the police. I remember my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. By the time the police searched the house, whoever had been in there was long gone. So much stuff had been stolen, I'm not even going to bother listing everything that was taken. The power outage had been intentional, no surprise there. My parents were livid and threatened to kick me out of the house. I basically had to beg them not to, insisting that there was nothing else I could have done. They eventually calmed down, but I'm still pretty shaken by the whole ordeal. I still have no idea who those people were or how they knew my name. I hate thinking about what might have happened had they found me. I live in a quiet suburban area, but there are a lot of more densely populated towns within driving distance of me. A few months ago, I picked up a night shift security job at a warehouse a few towns over. It was situated in this industrial space that stretched on for miles. The building itself was isolated with rows and rows of tall metal shelves and a couple of big loading docks. The work was easy, routine checks, basic security, making sure everything stayed locked up. It was quiet, usually too quiet, but I didn't mind. I liked the solitude, and most nights I could finish my shift without much happening. It was a Thursday night and it was pouring out. I was checking my phone every so often for updates on the storm, as I wasn't too keen on having to drive home in those conditions. Luckily, there wasn't much for me to do that night, so I at least had that going for me. The power in the warehouse flickered a few times, but held steady, so I wasn't too worried. But about an hour in, the power finally gave out, plunging the whole warehouse into pitch black darkness. I was pissed. I was the only employee there that night, so the responsibility for restoring the power was mine. I had obviously been prepped for a situation like this, but I never thought I'd ever have to actually deal with it. I stepped out of my little security room to begin the process. They had instructed me to unplug some of the massive machines before checking the breakers, so that's what I went to do. My flashlight was the only source of light in the whole place. It was honestly creepy as hell. The silence felt thicker in the dark, and every creak of the building seemed louder without the hum of the lights. My footsteps echoed like 100 times louder too, which was definitely an odd feeling. As I was patrolling one of the aisles, I heard a loud, metallic clattering echoing from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. It startled me, but I brushed it off as the storm rattling the roof or the metal shutters. Still, I decided to check it out, aisle by aisle. When I rounded one corner, I froze. A faint beam of light was moving along the shelves up ahead. It looked just like my own flashlight. It clicked off as quickly as I had seen it, but I had definitely seen it. No one should have been there until the morning, though. I felt my heart start to race. Why the hell would someone else be in here? I debated calling out, but ultimately decided against it. When I reached the spot where I'd seen the light, it was gone. The aisle was empty, just rows of crates and shelves stacked high with inventory. I started freaking out, knowing I wasn't going crazy. I knew what I saw. I had a job to do, though. I debated calling the police, but wasn't sure if what I had seen would be enough. I guessed there was a slight chance I could have imagined it. In hindsight, had the company not equipped me with a taser, I probably would have just called the police right there. As I continued my patrol, a strange smell hit me. A musty, metallic odor, like rusted metal or stagnant water. The smell was coming from one of the loading bays, a darker part of the warehouse where crates were stacked up floor to ceiling. I followed the smell with my flashlight, and that's when I noticed something odd. My beam reflected off the polished concrete floor, revealing 2 sets of wet footprints leading into one of the storage aisles. In that moment, I wanted to run in the opposite direction and call the police, but I couldn't just yet. If anyone was poking around, it was on me. That was literally my job. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the trail. I kept my flashlight low, not wanting to make it obvious where I was. As I got closer, I started hearing faint whispers, just barely audible, like 2 people having a conversation a few aisles away. I couldn't make out the words, but something about the tone sounded tense, almost urgent. I clicked off my flashlight and held my breath, trying not to make any noise. I gripped my taser and crept closer to the whispering. As I turned the corner, I raised my flashlight to confront whoever was there, but there was honest to God no one in front of me. The whispering had also stopped, which was pure insanity. They had literally been right in front of me. How the hell had they disappeared so quickly? The whole situation had me rattled. I decided that I wasn't getting paid enough for this, so I decided to just make a beeline for the circuit room and get the power on without worrying about my other tasks. I made it there and started fumbling around with the breakers in the dark. As I was doing that, I heard something scrape across the floor nearby. I swung my flashlight around and spotted the edge of a metal tool lying just a few feet away. A crowbar. It hadn't been there before. This was serious now. Whoever was in there with me had potentially malicious intentions. I yelled out that I was armed, which was kind of a half-bluff considering the taser. I needed to get out of there as fast as possible. My nerves were shot at that point, but I knew my life was more valuable than whatever consequences I'd face for leaving. As I was heading for the door, a loud, metallic crash echoed from the far end of the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of rushing footsteps. I felt a surge of adrenaline and started running toward the noise. I turned the corner, and there they were. Standing in the middle of the aisle were 2 figures dressed all in black. One of them was holding a crowbar identical to the one I had just walked past. They looked at me for a split second, and then, without warning, started sprinting directly towards me. I didn't think, I just turned and ran. All the confidence I had just mustered up was gone. I could hear their footsteps pounding behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I weaved through the aisles, praying that I'd be able to navigate this place better than they could. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded. I paused, catching my breath, and realized they weren't chasing me anymore. Eventually, I made my way toward the exit door and stepped outside. I immediately called the police and begged them to come as quickly as possible. They actually arrived pretty quickly, which I was thankful for. Of course, those 2 strangers were long gone by then, but the officers were really helpful, and even helped me get my power back up. My boss was not as sympathetic, though. He gave me shit for running, and I almost lost my job over the whole incident. I still can't get over how strange the whole encounter was. Like, it was clear that those people were messing with me, but they still chased me with a weapon. The worst part is I still work nights in that warehouse, although my boss did start putting at least 2 people on the shift every night. I still don't know what to make of the whole thing. I'm just glad those guys didn't catch up to me. I began subletting a rental house cabin for a couple months in 2023 when my dad and I were bucking heads and I needed to move out. The actual renter of the apartment was having his own personal issues causing him to leave the apartment, and I'll just refer to him as my landlord to make it easier. The cabin was an entire unit rental, and it was paid month to month, which was ideal for my temporarily shitty situation. It was 2 floors technically, a small kitchen, decent-sized living space, and 1 bedroom that you had to climb a little flight of stairs to get to, and there was a quirky hatch-type door that you'd have to open to get to the upstairs bedroom. I had already been there for a month. I paid for the second month's rent already by this point, so I was fully situated there. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road with a few other similarly sized cabin-type houses. One was vacant as far as I knew because I never saw cars parked out front or lights on. The other houses, well, I never met the neighbors, but I knew people lived in them. I work 12-hour shifts sometimes, and when I get home, I'm completely exhausted and will just go straight to bed and watch TV until I fall asleep. This was one of those nights. I got home, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a protein shake as my late-night dinner, then went to bed. I always shut the door on the floor every night. I find myself to be uncomfortable at night, having the entrance to your bedroom opened. Something about it makes me feel exposed or vulnerable, though this door on the floor didn't have a lock. This cabin was made for 1 person or a couple. I was watching TV in bed when I heard it. A voice from down below, saying, "Who's up there?" I instantly felt my heart stop for a second as I shot up to an upright position. It sounded like it came from inside the house, but it also could have maybe come from outside. I grabbed the TV remote to turn off the TV. I crawled over to look at the circular window above the bed. I didn't see anyone out there, but it was also very dark. I said, "Who's there?" And the deafening silence that followed afterwards led me to getting off the bed and putting my hand on the handle to the door. I lifted the door and looked down the staircase. I actually said my dad's name, thinking maybe he came over. When there was no response, I walked downstairs. I was extremely scared. I flicked on the first light switch I passed. The living room lit up. As I expected in the back of my head, there wasn't anyone down there. I was still chalking this up to someone from outside. I turned on the front outside light and looked out the windows, and there wasn't anyone in front. By this point, I was really confused. I turned off the living room light and climbed the stairs back to my bedroom, shutting the door on the floor. I was pretty awake now, so I turned the TV back on, and not even 5 minutes later, I heard pounds on the bedroom door from below. They sounded angry or like they were supposed to scare me. If there was any doubt before, this confirmed it. Someone was in the house. I left the TV on this time and just stayed completely motionless because I was genuinely too scared to move an inch. The scariest part was whoever was down there could easily open the door as there was no lock. I laid silent for about 20 minutes, and once I felt comfortable to move, I looked for my phone, and of course, of all times, it wasn't on my nightstand. I couldn't find it. I may have left it downstairs. So I opened the door of my bedroom and looked down the stairs. With the constantly changing light from the TV screen, I could see just a little bit down the stairs to the living room. So I went down the stairs quietly, and when at the bottom, instead of turning on any lights, I ran out the back door barefoot and ran to the nearest neighbor's house where I knew people lived, and I saw their lights were on. I knocked on the door a bunch of times, and then I noticed someone at the window next to the door, looking at me. I didn't know how long they had been watching me. I yelled through the glass explaining what happened, that I'm his neighbor, and that I need a phone to call the police. He definitely heard me, but he just stared at me. It was unsettling, and I started to back away from the door as I realized he wasn't even responding to me, just creepily watching me. I looked around the road and saw no other houses in the distance with their lights on. Momentarily, I had a thought. What if that guy had something to do with it? I went back to my rental through the back door, which was closed just like I left it. I went inside and locked it and turned on every light in the tiny house. I looked not only for an intruder, but my phone downstairs, and I finally found my phone in my car when I thought to look there. I was so tired earlier that I left it in the center console. I went back inside. The TV was still on up in the bedroom. I climbed the stairs, and when I got to the top, I saw someone sitting on my bed, staring at the TV. It was a man. I screamed, and he turned his head slowly to look at me, and before I could see anything else, I ran back down the stairs and outside, and now with my phone called 911. I sat in my locked car watching the house on the line with 911, and I saw someone walking past the backyard of the house, disappearing into the woods. I told the operator this. When a police car arrived, the one officer checked the house and upstairs room after I told him that I saw someone, most likely the intruder, walk away into the woods. He asked if I had any other places to stay that night, and so I swallowed my pride and went back to my dad's house for the night after packing some of my important stuff. I returned to the house the next day and stayed another night, then collected the rest of my stuff. Luckily, the landlord agreed to giving me some of my money back. He asked me what the man looked like, and after that, he didn't ask any more questions, which to me is pretty sus. Something was unusual in that situation, from that creepy neighbor ignoring me to the landlord's random urgent need to move out, to someone full-on breaking into the house. Maybe it's all connected, or maybe I'm overthinking it. It was a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. in 2013, and I was walking down a dimly lit street at night on my way home from work. My car had been in the shop, so I'd been forced to walk 3 miles home every day. The walk was barely an hour, so I was home before midnight. I live in a small town in southern Indiana, so after 10 there's rarely any cars on the road. The only vehicles you ever see are truckers heading to Indianapolis. I was about a mile into the walk when I turned on a dirt road. My house was off the beaten path, so I had to take all these dirt roads surrounded by forest to get there. As I was turning, I heard the sound of a motor in the distance, and it was getting closer very slowly. I saw about a quarter mile down the stretch of road I just turned off of a van moving very slowly, without its lights. At first, this didn't strike me as out of place due to the fact that the town I live in there is a pretty cheap car dealership that sells used cars and vans with broken parts, like broken headlights. So I just assumed this guy was one of their clients. I kept walking down the side road with the van still going slowly down the main road. About 5 seconds later, I jumped when I heard the sound of the van roar, and it sped up really fast, except now it had its lights on. I was startled, but not worried. This was until the van got closer to the turn for the side road. About 500 feet away from the turn, the van turned off its lights again and slowed down. Now I was officially creeped out. I didn't want to seem startled, so I just walked faster down the road. I kept turning back constantly to see if I was being followed. Then my suspicions became reality as I saw the van turn onto the dirt road. I was only about 500 feet from the van, so I started to walk a lot faster. I didn't want to look back, but I did just to be safe, and what I saw frightened every bone in my body. I saw the van there, stopped with both the passenger and driver's doors open. At this point, I ran for my life down the dirt road. I heard what I'm positive was a gunshot not far away, and I really thought this was how I was going to die. I made a quick turn into one of the surrounding forests and hid behind a big rock. I heard what sounded like a middle-aged man not far away say, "I think she went into the woods." And then, to my horror, what sounded like 3 young girls, with one of them responding, "Okay, sir, I'll see if we can find her." Now I wasn't fearing for my life. I was worrying I was going to be forced into whatever sick group this was. I was covering my mouth, trying not to make any sound, when I heard the man say, "Whoever finds her doesn't have to drink the blood tonight." A million thoughts ran through my head. Is this some sort of satanic cult? Are these girls kidnapped? Will I become one of them? I spent what felt like an eternity sitting behind a rock being scared of any sound that I could hear. Then, to my relief, I heard cop sirens nearby. I stayed there just to be safe. When I felt the courage to look from behind the rock, I saw red and blue lights right outside the forest. I ran out screaming for help, and the cops came to me and said, "Ma'am, do you know about this body?" I was confused and said, "What body?" Then I saw in front of the cop car the most gruesome thing I will ever see. It was what looked like a naked young woman, gutted, blood everywhere. There was no van in sight. I then explained everything to the cops. The car, the man, the girls who had to drink the blood. The cops said they'd look into it and were nice enough to drive me home. That night, when I couldn't sleep, I looked out my window to see the van, the same one from before, driving slowly without its lights on down my street. This time I was smart and wrote down the license plate. I called the cops immediately and told them what I saw and gave the license plate number. As expected, when the cops came, the van was long gone. But what they told me is what will horrify me to this day. The cops said we checked the license plate number. It's a plate registered in South Dakota. But the thing is, we checked with other precincts around the country, and they've gotten reports tonight that there was also a suspicious van with that license plate. One in Vermont, one in Nevada, one in Alaska, and one in Texas. They said we'll call you if we get any more information. The cops left, and I never got a call. I don't really believe in the paranormal, so my best guess is that it was some sort of cult that used fake license plates to do their sick things all across the country. But I guess I'll never know. I moved out of Indiana, and now I make sure when I see something suspicious, I bolt. My wife and I live in a normal suburb. We have normal jobs, normal lives, next to normal neighbors. We live the, I guess you'd say, standard American lifestyle that most of us are taught by our parents to achieve. Me sitting down to write this story is already saying something because I'm not a writer. The last time I typed something out this long was the last paper I wrote in college. But something happened not that long ago that no one can explain, and it still scares us to this day. My wife Gianna and I had a normal day, and after work, we decided to go out to eat for a change, and we got back around 9. We don't stay up very late on work nights, so by 9:30 we were brushing our teeth getting ready for bed. By 10 o'clock, we were in bed, and we usually shut the lights off at 11. We either read our books or watch our show. Tonight, we were watching our show. Then the phone rang. Gianna told me not to answer it. Anyone calling at this hour can't be good news. I agreed with her, but for that reason, I said I should pick it up in case it's an emergency. So I reached over for the phone next to the bed to pick it up, but it stopped ringing before I could actually lift the receiver. That old landline was trash. The second the call stopped, the caller ID would disappear, and there wasn't a way to check the call history. Oh well, wrong number. But a few minutes later, the phone rang again, so I grabbed the phone and looked at the screen. It said unknown number. Gianna and I both thought that was unusual, especially past 10 o'clock. I feel that there's a generally accepted cutoff time for phone calls, and that's after 9 p.m. I didn't pick up the phone, but right after it stopped ringing, the phone rang again. Suddenly, it felt like it was an emergency, like God forbid something happened to a relative, so I picked up in a hurry. On the other end, it was the voice of my neighbor, Al. He asked me if I knew that man standing out in front of my house. I said, "What are you talking about?" He told me to go outside and hung up. I found it insanely bizarre the way he'd just hang up abruptly like that. Gianna's face when I told her what Al just said was a look of fear. She said, "Don't go out there." I said, "I'm just gonna look out the window." I went downstairs and moved the curtain a bit to look out to the front lawn. There was definitely no one standing outside. I opened the front door and then the storm door and stepped out to the front stoop. I looked around and looked into the bushes right in front of the house. Nobody. So I got a little annoyed at the idea that Al would prank call us this late on a work night. It also just felt a little out of character for him to do that. I went back to bed and told Gianna that no one was out there and Al was probably messing with us. She was just as confused by that as I was. It just felt bizarre. She told me to call him, and so I did, but it rang and went straight to voicemail. So I left a voicemail saying, "Hey Al, what was that call about? Give me a call back." Then the phone rang. It said unknown caller again. I picked up, and it was Al again, saying before I could even say anything, "Go outside. There's someone standing outside your house." He said it in a calm, slow voice. Then he hung up. I got up and said out loud, "Alright, what the hell is going on?" I told Gianna to wait here. I went downstairs and back to the window. I looked through the curtain, and this time I saw someone standing right at the end of our walkway where it met the sidewalk. He had a hood over his head, effectively covering his face to just blackness. I was honestly shaken. I opened my door and said outside, "Can I help you?" The man just stood in place. I threatened him with calling the police. Then the house phone rang again. I closed the front door and went to the kitchen phone, and this time noticed the caller ID showed my neighbor Al's number. I picked up, and Al said in a much more normal voice, "Hey, I just got your voicemail. What was that about? I didn't call you." I was so confused. I swore to him he just called me twice, telling me about a man outside my house. He sounded even more confused than me. Then moments later, he said he doesn't see anyone outside my house. I went back out to look out the window, and that man who was standing outside my house was gone. I demanded Al tell me right now if this was a joke, and if I found out it was and he wouldn't tell me, we'd have a problem. Al claimed he was telling the truth, and he's not some immature prankster kind of guy. He's a very low-key, respectful person. I had to put him on speaker so Gianna could vouch for me that I wasn't going crazy, and that we did in fact get 2 calls from someone who sounded just like him. He did the same and put his wife on the phone as well to vouch for him. In the end, what could he really say though, except for it sounds like someone was pranking us. Eventually, we got off the phone, but I was no less horrified than I was before. I had to go back downstairs one more time to hang up the downstairs phone, and so I looked outside one more time. The man was still no longer there. None of us could ever figure out this unexplainable situation. So this happened when I was 20 years old. I'm 22 now, so it's not that long ago. While in college, I was a babysitter during the week for a family, and sometimes I would nanny for this other, wealthier family on the weekends. They would go away often on the weekends and leave their 2 kids, so I would stay at the house for the weekend with the kids. They had a whole dedicated guest bedroom just for me, and the family was super nice, so it was honestly great while it lasted. It happened in the fall. The leaves were all falling and it was chilly outside. I had gotten to the house Friday, and Friday night went completely fine. I just played with the 2 kids, who I'll nickname James and Jessica. James was 7, Jessica was 5. They were both cute and well behaved. Their bedtimes were 7:30 for Jessica and 8:30 for James. During the day I'd play with each of them with their toys. The family had 2 dedicated rooms for their toys. One for Jess, one for James. Jessica loved her dolls and doll houses. I spent a lot of time playing with her. James loved playing his video games, so I'd watch him play. These kids really had everything, and the house was gorgeous. It was a giant property with a big pond in the middle. It had a separate 3-car garage, and then a pool with a pool house across the pond, which was also a bar and rec room, with a pool table and darts, arcade games, and a giant TV and multiple sofas. This family was so well off and over the top that they even had an intercom that connected from the pool house to the actual house, so that if you press a button on the wall in either place, it would ring and then you could talk through it. The pool house also had a giant window that overlooked the pond and had a view of the house. So after the kids went to bed, I was free to do as I pleased for the night. It was great. I wasn't supposed to have friends over though. That was a rule I respected. I would just FaceTime my friends and watch movies in the pool house to pass the time. It was not a bad place to have free time in, I'll tell you that. I started getting hungry, so I walked back across the property to the house, entered the code to let myself in, and went to the kitchen. They had so many snacks and food that I was allowed to help myself to. I grabbed a frozen snack from the freezer and threw it in the microwave. And when I was done, I went back across the property to the pool house. I liked hanging out in there more because I could be louder on the phone and have the TV as loud as I want without waking the kids. I was on the couch eating, watching the movie White Chicks, while texting a bunch of my friends. I was just in the middle of telling my friends how great of a gig this was, when the intercom beeper gave me a heart attack. I went to go press the answer button, and I heard Jessica's voice on the other end, saying she's scared because she keeps hearing noises. Usually she'd sleep through the night, so I'd have to go tuck her back in. I set my food down and ran back across the yard to the house. I entered through the door with the code lock again and went to Jess's room. She must have ran straight back to her bed after we got off the intercom, because she was already back in her bed all scared. I went to tickle her and tuck her in just so she wouldn't be scared anymore. When she felt better, I left her room, shut the door, and walked down the hall back to the kitchen to grab some wine. As I was looking for a wine opener, I heard the ever so lightest crack in the wood floor from another room. I froze and looked in that direction, instinctively waiting for a second sound.
I didn't want to start freaking myself out now. I didn't want Jessica saying she's hearing noises to get in my head. I was thinking it was a regular house settling noise. I admit I was a little creeped out now, but I left the lights and TV on in the pool house, so I had to go back. I went outside, locked the door with the code, and ran across to the pool house. I sat back down on the couch and resumed eating the rest of my food. I didn't end up bringing the wine. I still had White Chicks on, though I was mostly just getting distracted on my phone. Then that damn intercom went off again, making me jump in my seat. I hurried to answer it, and when I did, there was silence on the other end. "Jessica," I said into the mic. I thought for sure I heard someone breathing, but that's all I could hear. I said both Jessica and James' names at least 3 times each. Now I was actually starting to become terrified. I called my friend Kelsey and told her I want her to come here because I'm actually getting really scared. I told her that the little girl I'm watching said that she was hearing noises, and then I heard a noise, and now someone pressed the intercom button but didn't say anything. I felt like it was not something one of the kids would do. I was still on the phone with Kelsey, who was telling me to stop being paranoid, but she also sounded drunk. I was looking out the window to the house the whole time I was on the phone with her. The hallway lights turned on. I told Kelsey this, and any ounce of possibility that it was one of the kids disappeared when a large figure stepped into frame at one of the hallway windows. I screamed and dropped the phone as I was looking at a grown man who seemed to see me, and he was looking back at me. I realized the intercom was still on this entire time. I picked up my phone, hung up on Kelsey, and called 911. And as I did, I was crying, screaming into the intercom that I'm calling 911 right now, leave us alone. I was basically screaming everything I said to the police into the intercom. I went back to the window, and he wasn't at the window in the house anymore. I was hysterical, crying, begging the 911 operator to please hurry up, as she kept telling me to calm down, asking me a million questions. I kept yelling the address into the phone and saying please hurry. When she asked are the kids safe, I screamed no, they're in the house still with that man. And that's when I heard the scream of Jessica through the intercom, and I completely broke down and fell to my knees crying as the 911 operator was still trying to get me to keep it together, but I couldn't. I said I don't know what to do, and she said the police are almost there, you need to wait. I replied he has the kids, and she asked if I saw if the man had any weapons. I said I couldn't tell, but then I heard Jessica's voice speaking into the intercom, saying my name. I went over and shouted, "Yes, I'm here. Get your brother and get out of the house." She was crying, saying that there was a man in here. I said, "Yes, I know. Just get your brother and come outside now." It was the bravest thing I had ever done, running outside back across the yard to the house and meeting the 2 kids who were already at the door. I grabbed both of them and led them back across the yard to the pool house again, where we hid with the lights off. Both of them were crying, and I still wanted to as well, but I had to be strong and keep it together for them. I still was on the phone with 911, and she eventually told me that the police are here, and that they'll come meet us at the pool house. Those words were the most comforting words I'd heard in my life. The flashlights of the police shone through the windows. I led the kids to the door, where we met a couple police officers. The female cop took the kids with her to one car. I went with another cop to another car. There were already 3 cop cars in the front of the house, and more kept showing up. I was answering all the questions I was asked, and then they found him. They brought out a guy who looked to be right around 6 foot. He looked at everyone as he was brought out in handcuffs and put in the back of a car. I still remember his face as he looked at me. He looked like the product of incest. His face was messed up. Jessica and James' parents were called right away and made aware of the situation. There was no way any of us were staying there that night. The parents arranged for the kids' aunt to come pick them up to stay with her, and I guess she called out of work the next day. I went home after they didn't need me anymore, but when I got home that night, I didn't sleep. I was still in shock, I think. I still had a leftover adrenaline rush. The parents understandably didn't leave their kids alone for a long time after that, I'm sure. I do know they pressed charges to the fullest extent, and with their resources, I hope that creep got what he deserved and more. I respectfully told them I couldn't stay there anymore because I was haunted by that night. I could only imagine how scarred those poor kids were, and maybe still are. I was 28 years old, solo camping in a local woodland with my beagle Reggie, only realizing I wasn't as solo as I thought. It was November. The weather was still mildly warm during the day, but at night it would get cold, so I came prepared. I brought my portable fire pit, lighter fluid, a lighter, and an axe for chopping wood. I also, of course, brought a tent, a sleeping bag, and my fishing gear so that I could fish at the lake. I brought enough food to last the 2 days we'd be there, but if I caught some fish, I would plan to eat it. I hiked from my truck about a mile into the forest until I was near enough to the lake. I set up my campsite in a comfortable little opening, and I brought Reggie along with me to the lake to go fishing. I caught a couple smaller fish that weren't really worth trying to cook, so I threw them back in. Reggie kept looking into the forest at something, and his tail would stop wagging as if he locked onto something. It could have been any number of little animals that he heard or saw. He's well trained not to go running off though, so I don't keep him on a leash. After maybe an hour of fishing, we went for a hike around the lake. When we were directly across the lake from our campsite, I looked over to the other side, and I saw what looked like a couple of people walking into the woods. They were so far away it was hard to tell, but they really did look like people, and they were right around where the campsite was. I didn't want to get robbed, so I told Reggie come on, and we made a quick pace back around the lake. When we got back to the campsite, my tent zipper was open. Someone had gone through it, no doubt. Surprisingly, nothing appeared to be missing though. Not that there was really much to steal beyond the fire pit and fishing supplies. Still, I knew I was right when I thought I saw people, and the fact that they had gone through my campsite gave me the creeps. To be safe, I spent the next hour or so moving my campsite to a different spot a little further up the lake. Then I started chopping some wood to get a fire going in the fire pit. Once that was going, I fed Reggie, and then heated up some chili for dinner. Then we sat by the fire, and I was writing in my journal when Reggie started barking at something in the forest. It was dark now, and I didn't really see anything beyond what the fire lit up. I looked out into the darkness, a little creeped out. On that note, I brought Reggie inside of the tent and went to put out the fire. If there were people out in these woods, I didn't really want to be advertising my location with the fire. I climbed into the sleeping bag, and with my reading light next to me, I was reading my novel. Reggie's ears would repeatedly move as he was hearing things that I wasn't hearing. He kept looking around at the tent walls. I kept saying, "What is it, boy?" He started to growl. He heard something out there. It could have maybe been a deer, it could have maybe been a bear, or it could have been a person. I found the idea of a person being out there still, in the dark, to be more terrifying than a bear. Eventually, Reggie calmed down and put his head down. With that, I was uncomfortable and wanted the night to pass, so I turned off my lantern and went to sleep. I woke up hours later to Reggie growling and howling. I told him to be quiet. I listened, and I could hear someone whistling, the kind of whistling you do to a dog to get their attention. Reggie started growling again in response to it. Someone was actually out there at my campsite in the pitch black darkness, and I was scared shitless. The whistling turned to a clicking noise from someone's mouth. Then footsteps started getting closer to the tent until they were right outside the tent, and then they stopped. Reggie was going ballistic howling, and I grabbed him and got him to be quiet without saying anything. Without the crackling of the fire, there was total silence apart from the wind. Reggie started growling again, looking in the direction of the zipper of the tent. Silence, until finally, another whistle from right outside the tent door. Reggie went ballistic again. I tried to fake a really deep, commanding voice and yelled, "You better get out of here, I have a gun," but my voice just came out shaky and scared sounding. The footsteps walked away from the tent at a slow, heavy pace until they faded away completely. That, or they simply stopped in their tracks not far from the tent, because Reggie kept growling on and off for like an hour after that. I couldn't sleep after that, but I was too terrified to leave the tent and pack up everything in the dark. My phone had no service in the middle of the forest, so it's not like I could even call a family member or a friend to tell them about what's going on. And then, out in the distance, there was a woman's scream that probably echoed for miles. It sounded like a woman literally screaming for her life. This was the final straw. I grabbed Reggie, put on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and ran. I ran the way I came all the way until I got to my truck. I still had no cell reception. I slept in my truck that night, and at dawn I went back into the woods with Reggie back to the campsite. I collected all my things and disassembled my tent. I didn't even pay attention to if my things were gone through again. I was just in a rush to get out of there. Half an hour later, I had the truck loaded up and I was out of there. As soon as I had reception, I called this non-emergency police number that I found online to report a woman's scream and suspicious people around my campsite the night before. I don't know what became of any of that, and I don't know what was going on in those woods, but I never returned to go camping there again. I was home alone one night. Our house is a split-level house, and the upstairs is an apartment basically, so my brother and I live upstairs while our parents live downstairs. It's pretty nice. It was a weekend and I was staying in. It was rainy outside, so my friends didn't really want to do anything. I spent the night watching scary movies in my room. I was watching Dr. Sleep, a movie I'd never seen before, and I was pretty invested in it. I paused it while I went to go grab a snack in the kitchen. I went to the pantry closet, grabbed a box of crackers, and then heard a sound from downstairs, which I dismissed as nothing. I went back to my room, shut the door, and turned the movie back on. I noticed the backyard motion light was now on, and then I heard some sounds from downstairs, directly below my bedroom. It sounded like the back door being closed. So to explain the layout of our house, my room is directly above the back door to the house on my parents' floor. The walls in this house are paper thin. You could hear a pin drop from downstairs. So I easily heard someone downstairs. And when I paused the movie, it became more obvious that I was hearing footsteps. I texted my family group chat asking who just got home. My mom answered within a minute saying we're not home. That would mean it would have to be my brother, but that would be incredibly weird since he never enters through the back of the house. He also wasn't supposed to be home tonight. I said in our group chat, "I hear someone downstairs. Alex, is that you?" He didn't reply. I heard the footsteps crossing the house towards the fronts until they were out of earshot. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I turned off the TV. The footsteps were coming straight down the hall to my room, skipping every other room in the hallway. They were heavy footsteps. They got to my door, and then my door opened. I was laying still in my bed, pretending to have my eyes shut, squinting just enough to see a head peering into the room through the doorway, looking right at me. It was dark. I could only see the person's eyes, and it didn't look like Alex. He stood at the doorway, watching for what felt like forever as I laid there pretending to be asleep. After maybe 30 seconds to a minute, he closed the door, but I didn't hear footsteps walk away. I texted my family group chat in all capitals, "Alex, please tell me that's you in the house." He replied back almost instantly, saying, "No, what are you talking about?" That was when I told them someone is in the house. I called 911 and started whispering into the phone, and that was when I finally heard footsteps walk away from the door. He must have heard me start to speak, even in a whisper. The footsteps went down the stairs, and then I couldn't hear them anymore. I was told to stay on the line with the dispatcher until help arrived. There was a knock at the door downstairs about 5 minutes later, so when the dispatcher told me I was good to go down to let the police in, I did. In my county, police work in pairs, so the 2 police officers who arrived looked through the whole house with me, checking every closet, under every bed, and when it was determined that the house was clear, they left. One of my parents left the back door unlocked. It was as simple as that. There's no chance of sleeping after something like this happens. Nobody would be home until the next day, so I had to get through this night alone. A little while after the police left, the backyard motion light turned on. Something set it off. I looked out my window and caught just a glimpse of a man walking away from the house into a far dark corner of the backyard where I couldn't see him anymore. I think he may have tried entering the house again, but this time the door was locked. I watched through the window for as long as the motion light was on. When it turned off, it was too dark to see anything out there. As long as the light didn't go off again, then I'd know he wasn't coming back. Thankfully, he never did. Taking half a second to lock your doors can be the difference between someone getting in your house or not. Because my parents forgot to lock the door, I will now forever have the haunting image of seeing that person's head peering into my room looking at me, specifically the eyes. It's an image that's going to stay with me. I'm a mother of 3, and so our grocery bills are quite high. My husband works at a tech company, and I currently stay at home raising the kids, who are 10, 7, and 3. I go food shopping at least twice a week, and I usually go to the King Kullen near our house, though I sometimes go to the nearby Target as well. Those are 2 of a very small list of grocery stores in our quiet town. To give as much context as possible, we're an Italian family and I'm currently 40 years old. This happened not even a year ago when I was 39. I was running behind on shopping one day, so I went much later than usual. The King Kullen by us closes at 10, and it was definitely past 9 o'clock already, so I hurried over to the store with my flyers and coupons. The kids were complaining about a lack of food in the house, so I had to get a quick grocery run in. Most days I'd have to go shopping with my 3-year-old daughter Haley. Since it was late and my husband was home from work at this time, for once I was able to go shopping alone, which I consider a luxury. I got to the King Kullen, which was pretty void of people at this hour since it would soon be closing. I grabbed a cart and quickly started doing my laps down the aisles and grabbing whatever was on my list and whatever was on sale. I was in the cereal aisle when I got a tap on my shoulder, which startled me. I turned and saw a very tan man about my height with a baseball cap on, a black goatee, and a red zipper-up hoodie and jeans on. He laughed and apologized for startling me, and said that he'd been looking everywhere for a specific bag of chips that was in my cart, and he asked where I found them. I politely told him the aisle, and he said he checked but couldn't find it. So I actually led him exactly to where I found the chips. He thanked me with his awful breath, and I smiled and was about to walk back to my cart, but then he started making pointless conversation with me about why he liked those chips so much. Something silly like the ingredients or a lack of a specific ingredient. I kept trying to make it obvious that I was inching my way back to my cart. He wouldn't get the hint though. It was when he made a weird pause and then said, "Gosh, you're pretty," that I said thank you and that I had to get back to my shopping before they close. I went to my cart, but he followed me and kept talking to me. At this point, as politely as I could, I told him I really would just like to shop in peace. He finally seemed to get the hint and walked away, but for the rest of my time in the store that night, I kept seeing that man circling the aisles, and each time he walked past the aisle I was in, he'd slow down or even stop and just look down at me. I was getting increasingly uncomfortable and hurried up my shopping. When I was finally done, I went to the checkout, and as I emptied my cart, here comes Red Hoodie Guy with a whole 2 or 3 items, and he waits on line right behind me. He doesn't say a word anymore, but I felt his gaze even through the back of my head. When I was done checking out, I pushed my cart away, and the man called out, "Have a good night, ma'am," and I ignored it. As I was unloading my car, I noticed the Red Hoodie Guy in the parking lot looking at me as he walked to his car. He got into a junky-looking Honda that must have been like 30 years old. He didn't turn the car on though, he just sat in it. I finally finished loading my car, so I got inside, started it, and began driving out of the parking lot. I looked in my rearview mirror a few times, and I didn't see any headlights behind me, so I felt safe to drive home. It wasn't until I pulled into the driveway and looked to my left down the street that I realized there was a car with its headlights off driving slowly down the street approaching our house. It pulled to the curb a few houses down. It looked to be that Honda from the parking lot. I went inside the house and called my husband's name. He came downstairs looking concerned, and I told him I was followed home by a creep. He hurried outside to the stoop, but by this time the car was already gone. The following weekend, late at night when we were all in bed, we heard some shuffling around outside in the side yard. I shook my husband to go check what it was, and he went to slide the window open. He saw someone right below the window trying to open the side gate to the backyard, but after hearing the window slide open, the man looked up and started to run. My husband grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and ran outside, and when he came back a minute later, he said he saw the car speeding down the street and he tried to chase after it. He perfectly described the shitty Honda that the Red Hoodie Guy was driving. It was undoubtedly him. We phoned the police, and given the late hour, a police officer arrived to our house in under 5 minutes. I described the man and his car the best I could, and that was that. He never returned to our house, not after seeing my angry husband chasing his car on foot with a bat. It still remains uncomfortable that a creep like that knows where I live, though. When I was in college, I worked at Wallbaum's. The one I worked at was a 24-hour one, So a couple unfortunate people would always be stuck working that awful shift. I thought since I was 20 and in college that my boss would never put me on an overnight shift. But unfortunately, I guess when she asked my school schedule and I told her I was off Mondays and Wednesdays, she saw me as a perfect sucker to stick on the overnight shift occasionally moving forward. One day I saw that I was scheduled for a Tuesday night from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. I had to triple check the schedule to make sure that that was right. I felt sick seeing that, and when I asked my supervisor why I was put on the overnight shift, he told me if I'm over 18, I don't really have a choice. I considered quitting, but I needed the job and money, so I just sucked it up and decided I'd do it this one time and then tell my boss I can't do it ever again because I have to study for school. So I arrived at the store at 12 o'clock and relieved my coworker Amanda. Half the lights in the store were out at this hour to save on electricity. There were a surprising amount of customers in the store when I got there. I guess more people than I expected would do quick midnight shopping runs. Past 1 a.m. though, the place was completely dead, maybe 3 customers in the entire hour. As it got later in the night, there were less and less customers. It was past 2 a.m. by this point. I was as bored as humanly possible, and there hadn't been a customer in over an hour. I wondered if there were any other employees in the building. There had to be, I figured. They couldn't have a lone 20-year-old running the whole place by himself. There was some bald guy who looked like he could be a manager that kept passing by the front registers every few minutes. He had a key ring attached to his khakis with like 10 keys on it, and he was holding a small backpack-type bag in his hand. So I said, "Excuse me, are you the manager?" And he came over and asked if it was my first day on the job, to which I said it was my first night shift. He shook my hand without giving me his name, and asked me if I could go to the back warehouse of the store and organize the pallets. He said he'd watch the front. I didn't exactly know what that meant, but I'd figure it out. I walked towards the back of the store, and as I did, I saw him doing something to the entrance door of the store, like he was reaching for some switch on the side of it, as if he were locking it. I made my way into the back warehouse, where I saw a tall man who looked like he were 30, wearing a manager's vest that said Wallbounce. He saw my apron and introduced himself as Rob, the night manager. I said, "Oh, I thought the guy in the front was the night manager." And he looked puzzled and said, "Who?" When I described that man from before, he asked me to show him who I was talking about because he was the only manager on duty. We didn't even make it out of the warehouse before all the lights in the store turned off. Rob told me to wait in the warehouse while he checks out what's going on. I watched as he walked through the warehouse doors into the darkness of the store, with the only light out there being from the lights of the dairy coolers that were still on. I sat on a box on a pallet, and was on my phone trying to text any of my friends who could have been awake about what was happening, when I heard a door from inside the warehouse opening. It was on the other side of the warehouse, separated by the freezer and dairy fridge. There were 2 ways in and out of the warehouse back into the store. I still sat there, now with my ears perked up, listening for any sounds, when I heard quiet, slow footsteps getting closer, followed by a voice saying, "Hey kid, you in here?" But it wasn't Rob's voice. It was that bald guy's voice. I hurried out the warehouse doors into the store, but quietly. I jogged to the front of the store looking for Rob, but I couldn't find him. I called out his name, nothing. I grabbed my jacket and tried to open the exit door, but it wouldn't open automatically. So I tried to physically open it, but it was locked. I heard footsteps approaching from behind me, and I turned and almost screamed, but I realized it was Rob the manager. He flicked some lever or something on the top right of the door and unlocked it, and he said in a panicked whisper to hurry and get outside. He followed behind me. We left the store and he got right on the phone with the police, and I heard his whole conversation. He said he believed an armed man locked himself into the Wallbounce and was probably trying to rob the place. I told him to tell the police that I think he was coming to harm me in the warehouse, which he relayed to the operator. He told me I should go wait in my car or leave. I'm sure because he didn't want the store to be held liable for anything if something were to happen. I went and sat in my car and just watched for a little while, and within 10 minutes there were at least 4 police cars outside the store. They all went inside for a while, and I didn't see whatever was going on, so I left. I didn't quit after that though. The next time I went into work, I was told all about what happened by my supervisor. The security footage showed that bald man circling the place, acting suspicious, checking if the coast were clear to do whatever he was planning to do after locking the doors. He cut the lights in the store, and the cameras showed him going straight to the warehouse where he told me to go. That's the scariest part to me, because if he were armed and robbing the place, he could have been on his way to put a gun to my head or something. The camera showed him leaving through the emergency exit in the warehouse way before the police arrived. In the end, I never worked an overnight shift again after talking to my boss, and I stayed at that job for another few months. I'm not sure if that man was ever identified. I used to work as a night restock worker at a supermarket in a somewhat rural town. The store was called Great American. It was the biggest and best supermarket in the area. My shift would be as soon as the store would close at 10. I'd work from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. the latest, restocking the shelves and organizing everything before the next operating day. I of course had the keys to the store for the after hours. It would be a team of 2, myself and one other, either Terry, Carter, or Alfonso. Tonight I was supposed to be working with Terry. I arrived to the store and let myself into the back where all the inventory yet to be stocked was. I started my work using the pallet jack to bring a whole pallet of boxes out to the shopping floor. I started with the bread and nuts aisle, rotating the older loaves in the front and putting the newer loaves in the back. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't seen Terry yet. I walked to the back area of the store where the inventory was, where we'd leave our belongings. He wasn't back there yet. I left the back door cracked open with a door stopper for him when he would show up. So I went back to work for another half hour, and with still no sign of Terry, I once again went to the back of the store. He wasn't in there, but I noticed the back door was shut. I assumed that meant Terry was here somewhere. I went to open the back door, and saw the door stopper was outside, which I thought was weird that he kicked it outside instead of bringing it in. I called Terry's name and it echoed through the room. He didn't call back, so I decided to call him. He picked up, sounding like he was in bed, and I asked him if he was at work. He said he wasn't coming in tonight because he was sick. Suddenly I got the chills. I told him someone kicked the door stopper off the door, and he said it could have just come undone itself. Nobody else was scheduled to work that night. I told him feel better, and we hung up. I wasn't sure if I was convinced that the door stopper came undone itself, because I kicked it under the door pretty tightly. I did a quick look around just to make sure no one was in the back of the store, and when I didn't see anyone, I went back to work, though I felt a slight sense of unease the whole time. I was stocking the remainder of the bread when I heard a loud sound echo from across the shopping floor. Okay, now someone had to be in here. I got off my knees and went to the middle aisle that intersected all the other aisles. I looked straight down the aisle and stood there for a hot second, and all the way on the opposite side of the store in the dairy aisle, a man dressed in black walked past the middle aisle, looking down in my direction. I felt my heart drop. It felt like that scene from the movie Signs where the alien walks past the birthday party. I had to think logically, that maybe this was someone else filling in for Terry's shift that our boss didn't tell me about. I started to speed walk down the center aisle and yelled "excuse me" very loudly. I looked to the left down every aisle I passed since he went towards the front of the store. In one of those aisles, he was waiting at the end of it, standing there fully facing my direction. When he saw me, he walked out of sight in the direction I was just coming from. I yelled "excuse me" again, and started to run down that aisle to catch up to him. I didn't get a good look at his face yet. When I got to the front of the aisle by the cash registers, I looked down the direction he went, and I saw him all the way at the end by the bread aisle. Half his body was hidden behind the shelf. His mouth was hanging open, and he started to wave me over, but he didn't say anything. His face was freaking me out. I attempted one more time to speak to him and said, "Who are you?" And he disappeared behind the shelf. I wasn't being paid enough for this. I went outside to sit in my car and call my boss. He picked up and I told him there was some random freak roaming around the store. He told me to get him out of there if I can, or call the police to get him out. I was not going to attempt to physically remove a crazy person from the store, so I called 911. I waited in my car until a police car showed up. I greeted the officer and asked him to follow me inside. We walked around the place looking for the man, and we saw him at one of the aisles again, creepily standing there again as if playing a game. When the police officer commanded him to come here, he actually listened. He was put in handcuffs, and he was the strangest man I'd ever seen. He kept smiling and looking at me non-stop, licking his lips. He had huge bags under his eyes. The only words he spoke were when answering the police officer, saying he was looking for a snack. I didn't like the way he was looking at me as the police officer was walking him back outside to his car. It was this menacing, threatening smile that I haven't forgotten to this day. I continued my work after that. Needless to say, I never left any of the doors open again. When shit hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. I was down on my luck living situation-wise, and I could only crash on the couches of my friends for so long. I was looking on all the roommate and apartment apps and websites, and I found something that caught my eye on this app. A man named Luke had listed a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent price was $1,200 a month. He'd basically be my landlord and roommate, as he would also be living in the house. He made sure to note on the ad that he'd be out of the house most of the time, and that the renter would have the place to themselves often. He did put in all capital letters a few ground rules though, including no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. They seemed like pretty standard rules. I went to view the house in person and meet Luke. The second he opened the door, I got a bit of a read on him, that he was a little reclusive. His demeanor was quiet and a little awkward. He showed me the house. I could tell he was nervous because his voice would shake and he would stutter. The bedroom was a good size, and the actual floor plan of the house was good. It was an open layout, meaning the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all one big open space. For $1,000 a month in my area, it was a steal. He laid out some more ground rules in person, and he emphasized again how I can't go in the attic or the basement, as I use them for storage only. Sounded fair enough. On the spot, I told him I'm interested. We shook hands, I left, and 2 days later, I was moving in. We didn't draft any sort of lease or contract. I was just going to be paying him off the books month to month, the first day of every month. I had settled in pretty quickly. The bedroom I was renting was already furnished with a bed and basic furniture, so all I did really was hang some of my wall decor and fill the dresser and closet with clothes. The bedroom had a lock on it, thankfully, and he gave me the key to it so I could lock it when he wasn't home, which seemed like a nice gesture. At first. Luke never told me what he did for work. He just told me he usually wouldn't be home, but I quickly learned that wasn't true. Anytime I'd come home from work, his car was always in the driveway. Quickly, I started to pick up on loud sounds outside of my bedroom at night, from footsteps to doors opening and closing constantly. One night, I went out in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom, and I noticed the basement door was opened. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down. There was a dim light from down there, seemingly from a far corner out of view. I heard banging sounds coming from down there. It was like 2 a.m. What could he be doing down there? Then the bangs stopped, and Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. It was so creepy that describing it in words doesn't do it justice. He looked visibly annoyed as he looked up at me. I apologized and said I'm just going to the bathroom. He almost angrily responded, "Shut the basement door." I listened to him, insanely weirded out. I went to the bathroom and then back to bed. I laid awake for a while after that, now with my mind racing, wondering what he's doing. About a week later, I returned home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving every day. I looked around my room to see if anything was missing, and while nothing seemed to be missing, I noticed some things had been moved. For starters, my clothes in the dressers were not neatly stacked anymore. They had been looked through, I could tell. The closet door was also cracked open. It was dawning on me that he had his own key, and he likely came into my room and went through my stuff. This felt like a clear invasion of privacy, and a violation of my tenant rights. I had to figure out how to confront him about it. I went to knock on his bedroom door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway once again, so he had to be home. I was getting such weird vibes from all of this. I gave up and went back to my room after microwaving my dinner. While I was in my room relaxing and watching TV, I heard the door to Luke's room open. I took this opportunity to get up and confront him, so I went out to the living room and caught him in a hurry about to leave the house. I stopped him and asked if he went into my room. He looked at me with a blank expression and straight up said no. I delicately responded without being hostile, saying that the door was unlocked and some of my stuff appeared to have been gone through. He then claimed that I had the only key to my bedroom, and then he said he's in a hurry, he has to go, and he left. I was flabbergasted by all of this. I wanted to ask my parents for advice, but at that time I hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. I was already back on the apps and websites looking up other listings. I knew I didn't want to stay here. Then I realized this was the first apparent time that Luke wasn't home while I was. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to check out the basement. I checked out the windows first to make sure his car was gone, and it was. I then went over to open the basement door. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any light switches, so I just used the flashlight on my phone to navigate around. The steps were so creaky I felt like I was in an abandoned house. I got to the bottom, and there was a tan carpet that was curling upwards at the walls as if it were poorly fitted to the floor. It was a very small basement, at least the main room. There was just this one ugly couch in the middle of the room. There was also a slightly funky smell down there, and the smell only got worse as I got closer to this door in the corner. I attempted to open the door, but unfortunately it was locked. Or maybe I should say fortunately, because I'm not sure I fully wanted to know what was in there, emitting that smell. It almost smelled like raw sewage, but worse. I did one little quick sweep around the main room of the basement though, and I found nothing, just some taped up cardboard boxes which I was not going to open. I went back upstairs and shut the door. The rest of that night, I stayed in my room. I never heard Luke come back. He must have gotten back after I had fallen asleep. I woke up. The room was still dark. My alarm was not going off. Something else had woken me up. I heard the floor next to my bed crack, and I turned and saw Luke leaning over my bed, looking at me. I screamed, and he replied to me to shush, and then asked me if I went into the basement. I screamed, "No, how did you get in here? I locked the door." He then asked me, "Are you sure?" I flipped the cards on him and yelled, "Did you come into this room when I wasn't home?" He replied no. Then he turned around and walked toward the door. I asked, "How did you get in here then?" I saw him hold up his hand in the dark. He wasn't holding anything. At the time, I didn't know what it meant. He said to me before leaving the room, "I think you should find other living arrangements." And then he closed the door. I started packing my shit right then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in that house. I knocked on his door and yelled at him to give me half of the rent money back since I'd only been there like 2 weeks. Moments later, he opened the door, and just his arm stuck out from the door, holding a small stack of $100 bills. He managed to make even handing me the money insanely creepy. I grabbed it. It was only $400. Whatever, it was close enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I was fully packed and out of there within an hour. I slept in my car that night. I ended up back in my parents' house the next day, and after explaining the ludicrous shit I just went through, something changed where they were more welcoming to have me back. I still moved out a month later, but my parents and I are fine now. If you're choosing to have a random roommate from online, just be careful and use your best judgment after meeting them. It was my junior year of college. I had moved off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate was sort of assigned to me by the school, in the sense that he was just someone else who needed someone to live with. His name was David, and he seemed like a nice guy at first. He was friendly and polite, always smiling and making small talk. But as the days went by, I started to notice strange things about him. Little quirks and odd behaviors that made me feel uneasy. It started with the way David would always linger in my room, asking pushy questions about my personal life and poking around my belongings as if he were way too comfortable doing so. At first, I brushed it off as harmless curiosity, even if I found it kinda weird, but the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Then there were the sounds I would hear coming from David's room late at night, talking and shuffling noises that were slightly concerning. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just David watching TV or talking on the phone, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, unable to sleep because of the strange noises coming from David's room, I decided to investigate. I crept silently down the hallway and pressed my ear against David's door, straining to hear what was going on inside. What I heard was just weird. It was the sound of David whispering to himself, his voice low and muffled. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whisper stopped, and there was nothing but silence. Then I heard, "Jeff?" David said my name. Did he somehow know I was outside his door? I quickly and quietly tiptoed away from his door and back to my room. I silently crawled back into my bed. I didn't know what to make of this. Why was David talking to himself? Was he hiding something from me? Or was he sleepwalking? But then how did he know I was outside of his room? I couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. The next day, I kept thinking about the night before. As the days went by and the sounds from David's room persisted, my paranoia only grew worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that David was hiding something from me. David's behavior also became stranger. I started to notice little subtle changes in his behavior, like he would make strange glances at me, and his movements seemed a little furtive. One night, I woke up at some off hour in the night and heard David's whispering voice from outside in the hallway, like right outside my door. It was genuinely freaking me out, and I was wondering if he was sleepwalking. I went to the door and put my ear up against it, and like last time, the whispering stopped. And then, David once again said, "Jeff?" This time I replied and said, "Yeah, you good?" He didn't respond. I just heard his footsteps walk away to his room. The following night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing. I heard David's footsteps walking away in the hallway. This was getting out of hand. The next day, I decided to confront him about his potential sleepwalking. I told him I'd been hearing him walking around late at night and heard him close my door last night. I then asked him if he has ever been known to sleepwalk or have any kind of sleeping disorders. He seemed to not know how to answer at first, but then he said, yes, he does tend to sleepwalk sometimes. I wasn't buying it though, something was up. I decided to search David's room for answers. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I waited until David was out of the apartment, then I crept into his room. I knew that I might not have much time, so I searched quickly, tearing through drawers and closets in search of anything that might explain David's nightly strange behavior. And then, just as I was about to give up, I found it. A small, nondescript drawer hidden at the back of David's closet. I pulled it open, and my blood ran cold at what I found inside. It was a collection of photographs, dozens of them, mostly featuring me asleep and one other guy who looked to be our age, all mixed together. They were taken from different angles and distances, some of them so close up that I could see the pores on my skin and individual strands of hair on my head. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized what I was looking at. David had been secretly taking pictures of me while I slept without my knowledge or consent. I couldn't believe it. I had been living with some kind of sick voyeur, like he probably got off somehow to these pictures. He had been violating my privacy and invading my personal space for who knows how long. I wanted to confront David, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what he might do, afraid of what he might say, afraid of what might happen if I confronted him alone. So I took a picture of the contents of the drawer, and then took a handful of the photos as evidence to use against David. I packed my things, and the next day, I showed the photos to the department in charge of student housing accommodations, and they told me to let them take the appropriate action. I was lucky and got assigned to a different apartment with a normal person who needed a roommate. I never spoke to David again. Even now, years later, I still can't shake the memory of those chilling photographs, and David's whispering and creeping around at night. I never found out who the other guy in the photos was. It was definitely his old roommate, but I was never able to find his name. But who knows? Maybe he also found out. When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the company, but I've been able to move back to my hometown and work at the local office here. But at the time, I needed somewhere to live that wouldn't be bank-breaking. I made a posting on basically all the websites for a roommate: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even on my neighborhood's subreddit. I had a guy named Rob reach out to me on Facebook, stating he has a room available in his place. I looked at his pictures to see if he looked like a somewhat normal guy, and he did. I was open to the idea of having a male roommate, as long as they seemed normal, even though my parents were very against it. Rob and I FaceTimed, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the place. Apparently he owned the place outright. It was a modest house in the middle of town, only a 10-minute drive from where my office would be. He also seemed pretty nice. I didn't get any bad vibes at all. His price was fair, and his rules were pretty fair too. He said it was available to move in right away, which was perfect. So it was settled. A week later, I had all my things packed and drove down. I met Rob right out front of the house, where he greeted me and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed about him was he was really short. He was eye level with me. He helped me bring some of the bigger and heavier bags inside. He showed me my room, which was furnished already. He said one of his friends had been living there and recently moved out. I replaced all the pillows and bed sheets with my own, of course. The rest of that day was me settling in. Rob, I could see, was trying to get to know me and presumably make me feel at home. I didn't get any overly friendly vibes yet. The next day was Sunday. Rob offered to drive me around town to show me around. I wasn't eager to, but I said sure, just to get off on a good start with him. He drove us around town, showing me where the good shopping centers are, good restaurants, and stuff like that. But then he offered to get us lunch. I really wasn't hungry, and he was suggesting a sit-down lunch, almost like a date. I didn't want him to get any kind of wrong idea, I just needed a room. I said I'm not hungry, and then he right away suggested we go grab drinks somewhere instead. I politely shot it down too, saying I don't drink on work nights. He was being a bit pushy, saying, come on, just a couple drinks. I still maintained my politeness and said another time. He gave up, and he went really quiet all of a sudden, like he was upset. I'll admit, I was slightly uncomfortable, but nothing I couldn't handle yet. That week was my first week at work, and so my attention was focused mostly on adjusting to the work week. It wasn't until a few days into the week that I got home and did my laundry and noticed my hamper full of clothes seemed moved. Like the clothes weren't how I remembered they were left, and it wasn't until I was loading the washing machine that I noticed a pair of my underwear was missing. I checked my room top to bottom like 5 times. It was gone. I had a disturbing thought. What if Rob... No, I refused to believe that just yet, and there was no chance in hell I would confront him and ask him that. Still, I was now starting to wish there was a lock on the bedroom door. That weekend, I bought a lockable doorknob from Ace Hardware, and while Rob wasn't home, I swapped out the current doorknob with the new one. Now I could leave the place in peace. I figured I'd tell Rob the next time I saw him. He didn't come home that night, though. He must have been working. His schedule seemed pretty random. That night, I awoke to banging on my bedroom door. It was Rob. He was saying my name, and he didn't sound happy. I checked the time, and it was like 1:30 in the morning. I decided I would pretend I'm asleep. I was honestly kind of scared to open the door. I had a feeling it had to do with the doorknob, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of texts from Rob, saying, "We need to talk. Be home after work." I simply responded, "Is this about the doorknob?" And he responded back, "Yes." I apologized to him and said I was planning on telling him. He replied back, "It comes off today." I was getting incredibly nasty and weird vibes from his tone. My next response I thought out a little longer, and basically said how I hope he can sympathize and understand that I'm a girl and I just feel safer being able to have privacy in my room. He responded a little nicer this time, but he still basically said no to my request and that the old doorknob needs to go back on. I was confused, I was upset, but I had to respect his rules. I did also install it without telling him, so I felt like he had a right to be kind of mad. But how did he know I changed it? It's not like I had the old doorknob sitting out in the open. The idea that he tried coming into my room that night kind of scared me. I changed the doorknob back the next day and returned to Ace. This is where things went really downhill though. There was a knock at the door one day when Rob wasn't home. It was a girl around my age. She asked me if I was living here with Rob, and I said yes. She warned me to get out of there immediately, that Rob has multiple restraining orders against him from different girls, and he's known to be a very dangerous, creepy stalker. I was at a loss for words. I asked her how she knew I was here. She said she knew that he was trying to rent his room, and that it's not surprising he opted to have a girl move in. She said she saw me moving in and wanted to wait till he wasn't home to come warn me. I thanked her so much. I truly was terrified now. I had already paid Rob for the entire month. I didn't know what to do. She said she would help me in any way she could. I took her number and she left. I started packing my things and looking for other places I could move to. I found something across town, a studio apartment sublet for a little more money. I contacted the poster of the ad, and she told me I could move in as soon as possible. Perfect. Now I just needed to tell Rob and get my money back. I started packing some of my stuff into my car, and I texted him that I'd have to be moving out tomorrow, as something with my family came up and I needed to go home. He didn't answer. He got back to the house about an hour later and asked me about my text. I came up with my best fake story possible, and he said yeah, he'll give me the money back tomorrow after he goes to the bank. I was super relieved. About an hour later, he knocked on my door and then said, "Did by some chance some girl say something to you?" I simply said, "No, what do you mean?" And he said, "Never mind, it just seems like you're running away out of here for another reason." I insisted that it was purely because of the family reasons. He said okay and left. Sadly, the story didn't end there. I woke up that night and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw a black figure sitting on the end of the bed. It was Rob. He turned and put his hand on my mouth and went, "Shh." I said, "Please don't hurt me." And he responded, "Why would I hurt you? I knew someone said something to you. Don't believe what these girls say." I said, "You're scaring me," and this part is still just as insane to me as it was in that moment. He started to caress my leg, and he said, "I don't mean to scare you," right after I said he's scaring me. I got out of the bed and ran for the door, and he screamed at me to stop. I ran outside with my phone in hand and called the police. I hid in the bush until they showed up, and I explained the entire situation to them. They made Rob come outside and give his side of the story. Basically, I told them I just want to get all my stuff out of the room and I'm leaving. So the cops stayed there as I collected the remainder of my stuff and brought it all to my car. I also insisted on Rob Venmoing me the money back while the police were there, and he did so actually. The whole time the police were there, he tried his best to act like some normal dude, I could tell. One of the officers then pulled me to the side to tell me that this guy had been arrested before for other incidents with women, but Rob denied ever coming in my room or touching me or anything, so it was all he said, she said. I left the house and went straight to a hotel for the night. The next day, I moved into the studio apartment. Luckily, the girl who posted it was able to facilitate my quick move-in. I have never and will never live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband ever again, or just anyone I don't know for that matter. The new year is coming up, and a lot of people are looking to break their bad habits with a New Year's resolution that probably won't last long. There's a more efficient way to break your bad habits. I'm talking about today's sponsor, Fume. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong, so instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all-natural, delicious flavors. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. It fills the void in a natural, guilt-free way. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing while breaking your habit. There's tons of flavors, and crisp mint is my favorite so far, and orange vanilla is a close second. The look and feel of the real wood and the shape makes you feel like you're really holding a quality piece. Stopping a bad habit is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Head to tryfume.com/nightmare or scan the QR code and use code NIGHTMARE to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. I own 3 pieces of real estate, 2 of which I rent out on Airbnb. The third property is my house in Montreal where I live. Where this story took place was my rental property in Wakefield, Quebec. It's a comfy small home in the woods that's advertised as such. It's a 2-bedroom, but since it's a small house, it's geared more towards couples. Sometimes I'll have groups of 4 or more staying there. Those are the groups I usually worry about because they're the ones who could do damage. With the couples, they usually clean up pretty well after themselves, and I trust a cleaning lady to go take care of the place afterwards. After a bigger group stay, I usually take the drive over there myself to clean and make sure nothing was damaged or stolen. It's only about 2 hours, and when I do decide to take the drive there, I'll most often stay the night there anyway. This was after a bigger group stayed for a weekend, so I wanted to go up there and just clean and check on the place. I let my nearest neighbor know I was heading up there for the day. Like me, he's also hardly ever there. So when I do go up there, I reach out to him to see if there's anything he wants me to bring around back, like his mail or packages. He texted back pretty quickly that he won't be up there this week, and he'd appreciate it if I could check if there's mail from a specific person. So on my way to his house, I pulled up his driveway to his mailbox. As I walked over to it, I saw footprints in the snow alongside the house. Before investigating that, I checked his mailbox, and there were just a few junky-looking envelopes, like credit card offers. I told him there's no mail from the person he mentioned, and then I let him know that someone had walked on his property. It wasn't the mailman because the footsteps came from the woods, approached the window, and then walked around to the back. He called me, and he told me to check where the footprints led to. I followed them all around the house, and then they led off into the woods on the other side of the house. He said as long as they didn't break in, I don't give a shit, so I left and drove the remaining minute up the hill to my house. The second I got out of the car, I noticed a bunch of footprints in the snow around the property. The guests left a couple days ago, and it had snowed there the day before I arrived, so it was a little interesting that their footprints didn't fill in yet. There was more snow coming tonight, so they'd surely be filled by tomorrow. The first thing I did was change the security lock on the front door for the next visitors. Walking into the house, it was kind of a mess. They left the sink full of dishes and glasses, the garbage bin was full, and cans of pop and beer were everywhere. Some guests are like this because they figure, hey, we're paying a cleaning fee anyway. I triple-checked everything to make sure nothing was taken or missing, and then I began cleaning. I had music playing as I cleaned, but even over the music, I heard something from outside. My house is all the way up on a hill surrounded by woods. No one should ever be here. I turned off the radio, and I heard footsteps in the snow right outside the house. They just passed a window, now going to the backyard. I went to make sure I locked the front door, and then I didn't make any noise. Whoever was out there had to know I was here because my car was out front. After like 20 minutes of sitting in the living room, I decided to get up and go outside to look around. Sure enough, there was a fresh trail of footprints circling the house. I followed them all around the house, and then they seemed to just stop or overlap in the back of the house, by the window air conditioning unit. I looked out to the woods, feeling like someone was just out there watching. So I went back inside and didn't go outside again that day. I ordered a lot of food on Grubhub that took forever to be delivered, which ended up being my late lunch and dinner. How I spent the rest of my day after cleaning and doing the laundry was just working remotely on my laptop. It was snowing again outside, and it was supposed to snow all night, meaning I'd definitely have some people looking to rent the next few days for the cozy factor. That's usually how it goes. After I was done with work and it was like 8 o'clock, I started watching a movie, and during the movie, I was hearing these creaks and cracks in the ceiling that I'd never heard before. There's no attic, so it was weird. My only idea was that it could be the weight of the fresh snow on the roof. After the movie, I went to bed. I could hear the sound of the snowflakes hitting the windowsill outside. It was so peaceful. But that unsettling sound of footsteps in the snow outside returned. The realization that someone was outside this late at night was horrific. The footsteps passed my window, then faded away. I was sitting on the edge of my bed for like 20 minutes, waiting for any kind of sound, like one of the doors being shimmied with or something. Anything that would shift me from awareness mode to full-on defense mode. It was a long while of silence before I went outside in my coat and shoes with a baseball bat, and I walked around the house. There was once again another fresh trail of footprints, but this time they started at the air conditioning unit, and they walked away towards the woods. I then put it together that someone was likely on my roof before, and they climbed up and down via the window AC unit. I went back inside and decided to call the police. A Wakefield police officer came to the house maybe 20 minutes later. We looked outside together. He even climbed up onto the roof and told me there were indeed footprints and such on the roof that would suggest that someone had been up there. He was very nice and reassuring, telling me he wouldn't be far away if I heard them come back. I also told him about the similar footprints at my neighbor's house, just as a warning in case this person or group of people is targeting multiple houses for whatever they're doing. As he left, he said he'd be in the area. The next morning I left, and I rented the place out to a group of guests a few days later. They didn't report anything out of the ordinary. Thankfully, this was only an isolated incident that happened over a year ago. This is something that happened when I was, of course, home alone when I was a kid. I was in the 7th grade. My parents just recently started leaving me home alone. I would just play video games when they would be away. One night my parents were out doing whatever and I was alone, playing video games. We had the video games in the basement so that my older brother and I could share it, and our dad didn't want the video games in the living room. The basement at my parents' house is pretty big, but also as little kids it scared the crap out of my brother and I, where when it was time to go upstairs, we'd flick the light and spring up the stairs as if demons were chasing us. At 12, I obviously wasn't as scared as I was as a little kid, but I would still look over my shoulder every once in a while when I was down there alone, especially if I was home alone. I was playing whatever video game I played at the time, when bang, there was this crash at the basement window. I damn near jumped out of my seat as I turned around to look at the window. It sounded like someone hit their fist on the window. It was kind of dark out since it was cloudy and snowing outside. I looked at the window and noticed there were some snow particles on the window. It looked like a piece of snow might have hit it. My initial thoughts was that it was a falling icicle hitting the window. I tried to go back to playing video games, but the icicle theory melted when there was another loud bang on the glass. I stood up this time and looked closer at the window. There were even more particles of snow in the glass now. Someone was out there throwing snowballs at the window. I knew it had to be my brother Keith. I went upstairs into the backyard door. I opened the interior door and looked out through the glass exterior door. The brick wall to the left blocked view of the entire backyard, so I opened the door and stepped into the yard, with only a pair of slides on my feet. The cold snow and air was blowing in my face as I stepped down the 2 steps to the ground level and looked beyond the brick wall. I called Keith's name and said, "Why didn't you tell me you're coming home tonight?" I saw someone in the bushes in front of the back fence. They were clearly hiding. I said, "Keith, I see you." But the more I looked, the more scared I got, questioning if that was actually Keith. I went back inside and locked the door. I went straight to the phone and called my mom to ask her if Keith is supposed to be home. She told me no, he's at his friend's house for the night. Right at that moment, another snowball. I asked my mom if she heard that, and she said yes. I told her there's someone in the backyard throwing snowballs at the windows. She now put me on speaker so my dad could talk too. My dad asks if it's some kids messing around, and I said I don't know. I was just a kid, and I was freaking out. I asked, "When are you guys going to be home?" And they said soon, they're already on their way home. I remember my mom telling me to not let them know I'm home, but I said they already know because I went outside into the yard. So she told me to just wait upstairs in my room with the door locked, and she was going to call the police for me. And that's what I did. I went to my room and kept the lights off. It was getting darker out, but when I looked out my window, I could still see. There was someone walking around the backyard. They were looking through the downstairs windows, and then I saw them knocking on the kitchen window, the one they threw the snowball at minutes ago. They thought I was still in there because the light was left on. Whoever it was, they weren't a kid. They looked too tall. Maybe they were an older teenager or something, but I couldn't tell because they had a jacket or a coat on with the hood up. I kept watching, and I saw they tried lifting open the window downstairs. Obviously, in the dead of winter, those windows hadn't been unlocked for months. But one thing was for sure, they were trying to get into the house. He then started looking up at the upstairs windows, and that's when I ducked down. I didn't look out the window again. There was a crash at my bedroom window now. He must have seen me. He threw a few snowballs at the windows in my room, and then it just stopped. My mom called me back to make sure I'm okay and told me that the police are on their way. It took a long time, probably because of the conditions, but the doorbell eventually rang, and so I went down to confirm it was the police before letting the police officer in. It was a lone female cop, probably in her 40s. She walked around the property with her flashlight as I stayed inside and watched through the windows. She checked the bushes, the shed, and the patio. When she came back front, she said there were footprints all over the yard, but that there's definitely no one out there. Not anymore, at least. She spoke to my mom on the phone for a few minutes, and then she told me that she's going to wait here until my parents got home. At the end of the day, my parents showed up, the cop left, and I was okay. It may have just been some weirdo or some teenagers playing some messed up prank, though the guy trying to open the window makes me think otherwise. If it were an attempted break-in, it was clearly the dumbest attempt ever after alerting me with the snowballs. I think it was someone that was just trying to scare me, just to be a twisted individual. Many years ago, I went with my girlfriend Trish, my friend John, and his girlfriend Katie to the Colorado Rockies in the dead of winter. John is a longtime friend of mine who I love to do outdoor activities with, like hiking, snowboarding, and mountaineering. John's family owns a cabin there, so we stayed there for a couple nights. We picked a weekend with snow in the forecast. When we arrived to the cabin, there was already snow on the ground, but there was more snow in the forecast for the next day. The first night we got there, we all unwinded by jumping in the hot tub and having wine. The cabin is very remote in the middle of the woods. There were small snow flurries falling from the sky that night while we were in the hot tub. It was a sign of what was to come tomorrow. The next day, we all woke up to see it lightly snowing outside, lighter than the forecast had let on. Not much new snow had accumulated on the ground yet, but we still held out hope that it would continue to snow throughout the day. John fueled up the quad his family had in the big shed out back. We had to jump it with my car initially, but when it was up and running, we took turns riding it around the trails on his property. This went on for hours, as his property is massive. It has big openings perfect for drifting and doing donuts, and then it has tight, winding trails to ride through. Throughout this foggy day, it was snowing, but earlier in the day, it was a light snowfall. John rode around with Katie for a while Trish and I were outside sledding down this big hill on the property. After a while of this, we all went out for lunch. I took my pickup truck there, so getting around in the snow wasn't an issue. By the time we got back, the girls were ready for a nap. John and I said screw that, and we put on our hiking gear and went into the woods, climbing one of the trails we had been riding around on the quad. This trail went way up the mountain though, past John's property, so we began to climb. Both of us are really fit, so we're used to this kind of thing, but for the average person, hiking an uphill in the snow with heavy boots on can get very tiring. We hiked for about half an hour to an hour up the mountain before we made it near to the top. Or at the very least, we stopped at a spot that would have been an amazing view if it weren't so foggy and snowy. All we could see was white. We took a break up here though and sat in the snow. The snow was starting to come down a lot harder now. The forecast was right. I asked John for like the third time, "Are you sure you know how to get back?" And he said yes, absolutely. So he led the way back down the mountain. It was a full-on blizzard at this point, so we picked up the pace. Luckily, going down is a lot easier than going up. At some point as we were descending, I heard this moaning, humming type sound coming from behind us out of nowhere. I told John to stop and asked if he heard that. He said no. We stood still and waited. Then it happened again. There was this rumbling, moaning type sound coming from not far behind us. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded human. We both turned and started going quicker down the mountain after hearing it. I said, "What is that?" And he said he has no idea. I started to hear footsteps from behind us. I said to John to stop again, and then we stopped and listened. You know how it's dead silent during a snowfall? Well, that's why it was so easy to hear footsteps from behind us. It was so foggy and the forest was so thick, however, that it was near impossible to see whoever it could have been. John said that was definitely not the sound of an animal, and no animals would be following us, especially when we're making noise. I suddenly felt a vibrating in my coat pocket. I took out my phone and saw Trish was suddenly blowing up my phone. She must have been trying to reach me, but I didn't have service until now, and all her texts sent at once. As we continued to walk, I took off my glove so I could answer what she was saying, but as I read her texts, I started to worry. She was asking if that's John and I outside of the cabin, and that they're scared to go out there. I replied the best I could with my wet fingers, "What do you mean?" It didn't deliver. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. I lost reception again. I told John about the text, and said we have to hurry. All the while, we kept hearing humming and moaning sounds not far behind us. We were basically running at this point, all the way down back to the cabin. We finally saw the lights of the cabin through the quickly darkening woods. We got to the cabin and knocked on the door for the girls to let us in. Once inside, the two of them started talking over to each other, trying to explain what happened. Basically, what they told us was that they saw two people walking around outside like 10 minutes ago, one of them stopping by the window and looking in. They were too scared to go over and shut the blinds until we got back, so they stayed hidden in one of the rooms. John went to his dad's room to get a gun. All the blinds were closed now. The problem was we still had to go out for dinner, so John and I went outside after tensions cooled. He brought the gun with us. We looked around quick, then told the girls that it was clear to come to the car. We didn't bother telling the girls about the sounds in the woods because it would just further scare them. We went to a diner, then came right back. We skipped the hot tub tonight and instead had a movie night inside. It was interrupted by a loud and aggressive knock at the door. We all looked at one another, and I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. John grabbed the gun off the table, and he came back over to us. Whoever was out there knocked again. John asked if he should threaten to shoot them. I said no, we should just remain quiet. There was never a third set of knocks. The girls went to the bedrooms, while John and I stayed in the living room, waiting in silence for about half an hour. He had the gun loaded, though I know he was hoping he wouldn't have to use it. The two of us opted to sleep in the living room that night so that we would be able to hear anything. We made it through the night. The next morning, we all packed up. I helped John clean up and put everything back into the shed outside. Then we left. But the really weird part was that there were no footprints at all in the snow outside the next day. It's possible that they were filled in by the new snow, but still, it seemed weird. Whatever was going on there that night couldn't have been good.
Starting a new job is always a mix of excitement and nerves. When I landed a summer job at a local carnival in downtown LA, I was just looking for some extra cash before my senior year of college started in the fall. The carnival was a typical setup with rides, games, and food stands, but its main attraction was the fun house, which doubled as a haunted house after dark. It was actually a solid structure that I think used to be some old guy's mansion or something. I was assigned to manage the fun house, which was a favorite among the carnival goers. It seemed simple enough. Guide the guests in, ensure they have a fun, safe time, and observe them leave. At first, everything seemed straightforward. But then I started noticing odd things. It started with small discrepancies. I'd count a dozen people entering, but only 11 would emerge. At first, I chalked it up to miscounting. After all, keeping track in the chaos of laughter and screams was no easy task. However, as the days passed, the numbers just didn't add up. 7 went in, 6 came out. 10 went in, 9 came out. Was I going crazy? Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it much longer. One particularly busy afternoon, a blonde girl caught my eye as she walked up to the funhouse. She was drop-dead gorgeous, and almost seemed out of place amidst the childlike atmosphere. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. I genuinely had to do a double take. I'm not a weird guy by any means, but I couldn't help but lock eyes with her for a few seconds. She smiled, handed me her ticket, and I directed her into the attraction. After she disappeared into the darkness, I went back to my duties. Time ticked by, and I watched attentively as people entered and exited, sometimes asking me questions and whatnot. Admittedly, I was paying a little more attention to the guests that night, as I wanted to see that girl as she left and maybe work up the courage to talk to her. Pretty soon, I started picking up on the fact that groups of people who had entered after her were beginning to emerge. A few more minutes passed, and I started getting worried. She should have been out by now. Compelled by a genuine concern, I decided to abandon my post for a few minutes and go looking for her. I stepped inside and locked the entrance door. I began investigating, navigating the dimly lit rooms and narrow corridors. I moved through the house until I came across something I hadn't noticed during my initial walkthroughs, a barely noticeable seam in the wall. I'm not really sure what I was expecting, but curiosity got the best of me. I pressed against the seam, and I heard a distinct click. I played around with it some more, and my jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized it was a hidden door. It swung open slowly, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I stood there in shock. What in the world was this doing here? I was definitely going to have a long conversation with my boss about this. I walked into the hallway with my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I didn't have much brainpower to spend being nervous because I was still so shocked about the whole situation. I got to the end of the passage and found another door. I flung it open, and to my surprise, it was a concealed exit that led back to the carnival grounds. I breathed a sigh of relief as this discovery proved I wasn't going crazy. All those people I hadn't noticed leaving the attraction had probably stumbled across that secret door by accident and assumed it was the correct way to go. As I walked back the way I had came, I couldn't help but feel a little bummed out that I wasn't going to get the chance to talk to that girl. I'm not sure what came over me, but I decided to keep exploring the funhouse instead of returning to my post. I think a part of me just wanted a few extra minutes of this impromptu break I was taking. I walked through a couple more rooms, and that's when I noticed it. On one of the walls was another faint seam, identical to the first one I had seen. I again played with it until it clicked and swung open. I could immediately tell this one was very different. The putrid smell was the first thing I noticed. More concerning, though, was the fact that there was no corridor in this one, but a ladder that led downwards. I was more confused than anything. This door was on the ground floor, and I was told specifically that this place didn't have a basement. I debated climbing down, but I just felt awful about the prospect that the girl might be down there. So against my instincts, I began the descent. The smell only got worse as I climbed down into the darkness. I was expecting to find a basement, but what I found instead was far, far worse. I got to the bottom and pulled out my phone's flashlight. I was frozen in shock. I was literally standing in a tunnel that extended into the darkness. There was literally no way that this was part of the house above. The rational part of my brain screamed turn back, to forget about it, but the mystery was too compelling. I ventured further, being careful not to make any noise. The walls were damp, and the tunnel was completely silent. As I explored, my flashlight beam fell on something unexpected. A white, glittery purse was sitting in the middle of the corridor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It looked familiar, and then it hit me. It was that girl's purse. I was sure of it. I started to panic. Was she really down here? I doubted there was any way a rational person could find this tunnel and not turn around, but the proof was literally in my hands. My mind started racing. Was she hurt? Lost? And then a more terrifying thought hit me. Was she alone? I didn't feel safe anymore, but I was in too deep. Violating every survival instinct I had, I yelled out into the tunnel for that girl. I waited. Nothing. I was just about to shout again when I heard the sound of rapid footsteps echoing through the tunnels. My first instinct was to run. I had every reason to believe whoever was running toward me was hostile. I turned around and bolted back to the ladder. I got halfway up and slipped, falling back to the bottom. The footsteps were basically right on top of me now. I knew I was done for. I braced myself for a fight, and then a voice rang out. A girl's voice. Her voice. She gasped, "Help me," clutching her side as if in pain. I yelled at her to climb up, but she insisted that I follow her back into the darkness for some reason. I told her there was no chance I was doing that, and basically forced her up the ladder. We got to the top, and I slammed the door shut. I asked her how in the world she ended up down there, and she couldn't really give me a straight answer. She kept saying she didn't really remember how it happened, just that she suddenly realized she was underground. She said she started hearing things moving in the dark, and that there were voices calling to her. I didn't know how to process this. I asked her if someone had guided her down there, and she said she didn't remember. The weirdest thing about her story was that she was looking at me with this blank stare that genuinely freaked me out. I basically interrogated her about why she told me to stay down there, but she didn't answer. I had had enough. I wanted to get as far away from this person as possible. I called the police, but she opted to leave the funhouse before they got there. I never saw her again. The police investigated, and what they found was actually insane. Apparently, this house had been some sort of safe house during Prohibition in the 1920s. As such, it had a bunch of secret passageways that led to a section of the underground Prohibition tunnels that hadn't been discovered. The owner claimed he had no idea about the house's history, but I was skeptical. I quit my job and got as far away from there as possible. I still have so many questions. Did the owner know about this? Was that girl almost kidnapped? Had someone knocked her out and took her down there or something? Was she part of the whole thing? I feel like there's a number of explanations for what happened to me, but all of them are equally terrifying. Ever since I was a kid, I loved carnivals, the lights, the games, the unpredictable joy of it all. I know lots of people find them weird and childish, but not me. Growing up in a small town in Indiana, it's not like there was a whole bunch to do, so whenever the carnivals would roll through town, you best believe I was spending as much time there as I possibly could. It's been over 20 years, and I still enjoy the atmosphere of a local carnival, despite what I'm about to tell you. I think my love for carnivals is something I'll never lose. I was like 10 or 11 when this happened, and I was a kind of nerdy kid growing up. In the days leading up to the spring carnival, I found myself in the library reading up on whatever I found interesting at the time. For whatever reason, I wound up in the history section. I remember the books being literally caked in layers of dust. That's how long it had been since they were even touched. I was flipping through a book on the history of our town when a small, faded slip of paper fell out from between the pages. Confused, I leaned down to pick it up. To my pleasant surprise, it was a ticket for our local spring carnival, dated over 15 years ago. The odds of something like that happening had to be extremely low. I was ecstatic. This ticket would make a great addition to my miscellaneous collection back home. What was even cooler, though, was the fact that the date on the ticket was just 2 days away, when the carnival would certainly be in town. As I predicted, the carnival cruised into town the next morning, so I figured why not use the old ticket, just for laughs to see what the booth attendant would say. I wanted to get it punched anyway. The next evening, I headed to the carnival with the ticket safely tucked away in my pocket. As I approached the entrance, the carnival seemed just as lively as ever, the air filled with the scent of cotton candy and popcorn. I pulled out the ticket at the gate, handing it over to the guy at the booth. His face changed the moment he saw it. He went pale, his eyes widening slightly before he masked his reaction with a forced smile. It was honestly a little creepy. Enjoy your evening," he stammered, handing me back the ticket without punching it. I was so weirded out by his reaction that I forgot to ask him to punch it. I shrugged it off though, thinking maybe he was just new and confused about the old design of the ticket. I wandered around, played some games, and enjoyed a funnel cake. The night was perfect, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I felt eyes on me, observing. Maybe it was just paranoia. I tried to ignore it at first, but I kept noticing the carnival employees giving me weird looks. After a while, I got fed up and decided to ask one of the older game operators about it. I found a kind-looking elderly man running the ring toss booth. I showed him the ticket, and unlike the booth guy, he didn't even try to hide his shock. He glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Young man, where did you get this?" he asked. After telling him where I found it, I started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Maybe I should have just kept the ticket at home. "You found something you weren't meant to find," the old man started, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This ticket, it's part of a story that the folks around here don't talk about much. About 15 years ago, something terrible happened during the carnival, right here in this town." He paused as if weighing whether to continue. "There was a young worker, name of Ryan, nice kid. Everybody liked him. He was responsible for one of the rides, I can't remember which. One night he just disappeared, vanished without a trace. The police found his wallet, but there was nothing in it except a ticket that looked an awful lot like this one," he said, gesturing towards my hands. The atmosphere around us seemed to drop a few degrees. He continued. "They searched everywhere, even drained the local pond, but no sign of him. After that, strange things started happening every time the carnival stopped here. Accidents, things going missing, odd sightings. People said it was Ryan trying to come back, or something worse that took him. I could feel a chill running down my spine, but a part of me was skeptical. "And you believe that?" I asked. The old man shrugged. "I've seen enough to keep an open mind, but the point is, the ticket you found might stir things up. It's best you get rid of it, leave it here." He then motioned for me to give it to him, but I was reluctant. I looked down at it, reading it over again as if there was some kind of secret I was missing. How could a ticket be the cause of all of that? I questioned, still not fully buying it. The look in his eye got darker. His tone switched, almost as if he were angry. He told me to give it here, almost in a growl. I considered it, but concluded that some stupid story wasn't worth giving up such a cool souvenir. I told him no, and he actually sprung up with a quickness that startled me. He reached for the ticket, his fingers grazing my hand. I jerked back instinctively, clutching the ticket tighter. The old man's expression morphed into something desperate, almost predatory. "You don't understand," he hissed, his eyes darting around as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. I backed away towards the tent's exit, my heart pounding. "I think I should go," I stammered, turning to lose myself in the crowd. Behind me, I could hear his calls, a mix of pleading and warning. I didn't care what he was saying, though. I let the bustling crowd around me drown his voice out. My mind was racing, not even about the ticket, but more so his aggressive reaction. The joy of the carnival had been spoiled. I left earlier than planned, the ticket burning a hole in my pocket. Over the next few days, my luck seemed to turn sharply. I missed catching the school bus, scraped my knee pretty bad in a bike accident, and worst of all, my best friend accused me of stealing his favorite baseball card, something I would never do. Things got worse than that though. I remember coming home one night to my mother in tears after losing her job. My brother broke his leg skateboarding the next week, and our beloved family pet, Bean, also passed away a few days after that. It was like a dark cloud had settled over me since that night at the carnival. I couldn't help but remember the old man's warning about the ticket stirring things up. It seemed ridiculous, but then again, so was the string of bad luck that followed me. My dad laughed when I told him about my theory. He told me that there was no such thing as ghosts, and that I shouldn't be so superstitious. One rainy afternoon after school, after a particularly tough day where I had forgotten my lunch and had to go hungry, I pulled the ticket out. I stared at it, this small piece of paper that had brought nothing but trouble. Feeling a mix of anger and fear, I decided I had had enough. I grabbed my raincoat and boots and trudged out to the creek that ran behind our house. My heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest as the rain soaked through my hair. Standing at the creek's edge, I took one last look at the ticket before tearing it into tiny pieces and watching them get swept up by the current. It's just a piece of paper, I thought. Things started to look up after that. My friend found his baseball card and apologized to me, and we became friends again. I didn't miss the bus a single time that school year. My mom got a better job in the next couple of days. Whether it was all a coincidence or that ticket really was cursed, I couldn't say. But one thing was for sure, I learned to be more careful about what I picked up and brought home. I don't believe in the supernatural, even after all this stuff happened to me. My parents like telling me that I imagined everything because I was so young. It's still hard to fully explain it, but I've long since accepted it as one of those weird coincidences that you just can't explain. I hate carnivals. I think they're disgusting and filled with children. I hate the food, the games, and the smell of it all. My hatred of carnivals is probably biased though, and mostly based on what I'm about to tell you. A few years ago, I was dragged to our local carnival by my younger sister. I obviously wasn't going to be rude and not go, but I wasn't looking forward to it. After a while, my sister got bored and wanted to leave, so I called my mom to pick us up. I actually opted not to go with them, as I was in the midst of a fight with my dad and didn't want to go back home until he was asleep. I told my mom I'd walk home later, so she picked up my sister and left. The carnival was honestly a little pathetic. There were far fewer people there that night than I remember there being in previous years, and everyone looked miserable. I figured I might as well walk around a little to try and get my money's worth. After all, I had paid for a ticket out of my own pocket. I decided to step into the funhouse, as I figured that would at least be a little cool. I was expecting there to be a ton of people in there, but it was completely empty. There was literally not a single other person in there as far as I could tell. I had never been inside a funhouse alone before. People don't realize how important the laughter and talking is to the atmosphere. Without it, you're basically just standing there in silence, surrounded by a bunch of weird mirrors. It was honestly a little creepy. I shrugged my shoulders and figured I might as well walk through it. Admittedly, I did get a pretty good laugh out of the distorted mirrors. I think I was like halfway through when I noticed something odd. In one of the reflections to my left, there was a head that seemed to be peering at me. I only saw it for a split second, but it was a bald guy with really sunken eyes. I whipped around but didn't see anyone. To be completely honest, I had no idea where he had even been standing since there were mirrors all over the place. He could have literally been anywhere. I thought it was especially creepy since I didn't hear the funhouse entrance open. He either snuck in behind me, or he had already been inside. I kept walking, going a little more quickly now. And then, I saw him again, out of the corner of my eye. He had this deranged smile this time. It was the exact same face, I was positive. I tried to figure out where he was standing, but the reflections were too confusing. I yelled for him to get lost, but got no response. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I picked up the pace again, but it was difficult trying to navigate this maze of mirrors, and I kept hitting dead ends. I started sweating, constantly looking over my shoulder every few seconds. A few minutes later, I turned a corner after hitting another dead end, and a hand reached out from behind one of the mirrors, grabbing my wrist.
I screamed, cursing at the guy to let go of me, but he held firm. I punched his arm, forcing him to let go. I fell to the ground in the fray and saw the creepster in his full form. He was wearing all gray, had a bit of a gut, and a tired, sunken face. I jumped to my feet before he could reach for me again and sprinted back the way I came. I don't know if it was survival instincts or not, but finding my way back to the entrance was somehow easier with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sprinted out of the funhouse and caught my breath. I reached into my back pocket, and a horrifying realization hit me. I didn't have my wallet. I must have dropped it when I fell. There was no way I was going back in there. After running to the nearest staff person, I told them everything that happened. She seemed confused and told me that the funhouse was closed to patrons that night. I was horrified. They called the police and searched it, but found nothing, not even my wallet. I felt like such an idiot. I told them that that guy was probably an ex-employee with a key, but they shrugged off my theory and told me to go home. So reluctantly, that's what I did. It's not like I had gotten hurt or anything. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, but I can't. A week later, my girlfriend called me one night in a panic, frantically screaming into the phone about something terrible that happened. Apparently, someone had been texting her phone pretending to be me and convinced her to drive out to this remote location to help me change a tire. Thankfully, she decided to bring her dad, even though the guy told her to come alone. They pretty quickly realized what was going on when the car parked in the lot wasn't mine. Her dad stepped out of the car, and 6 dudes stepped out of the car in front of them. He sprinted back to the car and hightailed it out of there before those guys could catch up to him. The whole thing made sense. I did have my girlfriend's number written down on a slip of paper in my wallet, which explains how he got her number. Both of us changed all our contact information, and it's been a month without incident. I really don't know how to feel about this whole ordeal. I think I'm just going to try to block the memory out of my head.
When my dad was around 50, he got an African Grey. He always loved parrots his whole life, so I was happy for him to get one after his retirement. He named the bird Kevin. My dad taught Kevin a whole vocabulary of words, and he actually trained him to understand the meaning behind certain words, like hello, what's up, food, thank you, good, and a few others. My dad passed away at 70, and with that came the time to figure out amongst my siblings and I what would happen to Kevin. My brother and sister didn't want the responsibility of taking Kevin into their homes, plus their spouses were against it too. But I couldn't bear the idea of giving him away to a new home. Kevin was and is one of my last connections to my dad. In a sense, that was his best friend, so I decided I would take him into my home. I put his cage in the den of my house. My house doesn't have a basement, so the den is considered the lowest level of the house. Kevin is a moderately noisy bird. He can be a chatterbox some hours of the day, usually earlier on. But later in the day and at night he quiets down. When he's too noisy, I'll throw a blanket over his cage, and that normally quiets him down. I watch TV in the den at night to keep him company. Then around 10, I'll migrate to my room to let him go to sleep. That's pretty much the backstory behind Kevin. I've been taking care of him for 2 years now, so I know exactly how he behaves and when he's acting out of the ordinary. Speaking of out of the ordinary, there was one night in December around 11 p.m. that Kevin started making sounds while I was trying to sleep. I sleep with the door open since I live alone and need to be able to hear anything if something's going on in the house. Hearing him making his squawking noises past dark, especially this late at night, is unusual beyond doubt, and something was irritating him. I went down to the den to see what was bothering him. He was wide awake on the lower perch of the 2 in the cage. He looked at me and was saying things like hello and what's up, and his name. All the while he was nodding his head up and down, moving his whole body in the process as if he were dancing. I tried to feed him, but he didn't eat, so I covered him with the blanket, hoping he would stop. I was in the kitchen when I stopped inside, because he was still making the noises, and I had a feeling he wasn't going to stop. Having work the next day, I couldn't afford to lose sleep because of him. I really didn't know what to do. I'm still to this day not exactly a bird expert. I went back downstairs and uncovered him. He was still doing his little dance, bobbing his head and body and making his distressed sounds. It didn't click with me until thinking I heard something in the pantry closet a few feet away from his cage. I walked over to it and hovered my hand over the light switch to the pantry, which was outside of the door. The door has one of those big glass panels that many pantry doors have, so when I flicked the light switch, I saw the outline of a body on the inside. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I chose fight. I opened the door screaming, trying to get my adrenaline rushing, and I grabbed the man in the pantry closet out and threw him to the floor. He tried to fight back, but I easily overpowered him and had him in what I could best describe as a chokehold. He was a 50-something-year-old homeless-looking man with a smell to match it. I yelled at him, "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" He tried grabbing my face to possibly gouge my eyes or something, but I continued to wring his neck and punch him. During all of this, Kevin was going berserk in his cage. When the man on the floor seemed weak enough, I literally sprinted for the nearest phone and came right back and kept him on the ground while I called 911. The man was taken to jail, but he had no ID on him, nothing. He was homeless and had nothing to his name, and as such he was considered what some people call judgment-proof, meaning even if I tried to sue him, I wouldn't get anything from him. He had raided my pantry closet that night and had opened jars of peanut butter, boxes of cookies and crackers, and all sorts of other boxed and canned foods. If it weren't for my dad's parrot, I don't know what else that man would have taken or done in my house. I'm grateful for Kevin, and I like to think part of my dad is watching over me and that bird. This story takes place when I was a junior in high school. For context, here's a little background information. Back in the day, I was a pretty involved student, took all the hard classes, and was in a few varsity sports. In one of these ways, I was always busy and didn't have much time for myself, and part of me was thankful for that. It provided me an escape from a world where my parents had recently parted ways and my older brother had just gone to college. It was just me and my little brother then. He also was a swimmer and a smart kid in his own right. We were really similar, even to this day, but probably because of the stresses our family situation put on us at the time, we didn't get along, near at all. One of those wet winter days in the Midwest, I'd put in my time at school and swim, and I still had to sit down for several hours of homework. This time I had to write an essay for some advanced class that I wasn't really interested in. I dropped my swim bag at the door when I got home and looked around my house to see if anyone was home. Empty. Dad must be out with Reese at swim practice. His club team had the slot at the pool after the high school team was done. I popped in a mouthful of Cheez-Its and headed down to the basement to my office to get some schoolwork done. The house was a middle-class 2-story with an unfinished basement, with the exception of what I referred to as my office. From a career past, my dad used to work from home, but no longer did. I was the only one who used this place, so my family, or what was left of it, just called it Quinn's office. So I made my way across the concrete floors and unattached carpet samples down there to the one finished out room in the basement. I flicked on the CFL light. It was like any other night after practice. I still had hours of homework to do. So I turned on the computer and started typing away. I was typing for what seemed like an hour, trying to bring to words to what the concept of hedonism and the picture of Dorian Gray meant to me as best I could, or as convincingly as I could. Out of the dark, I heard my little brother call out to me, "Quinny, Quinny, come up." Almost reflexively, I called back to him, "Reese, I'm working, what do you need?" We would yell through the house like brothers do, but it took me a minute to realize I didn't hear him come home. I got no response, only for a couple minutes though. Again, I heard my little brother's voice sing out, "Quinny, Quinny, come up." It felt strange hearing those words carry across the dark, concrete floor. He's supposed to be at swim practice. I called back out to him, asking if he needed anything, but again, I received no answer. I thought about just starting my essay again, but the family situation was delicate at best, and I didn't want to be in trouble if my little brother actually needed something. I made the decision to get up and go find out for myself. I bounded up the basement staircase, the only way a high schooler can, and I called out again for my brother. "Reese, what's up? I'm really busy." I checked all around the main floor looking for my little brother, or even signs he was home. No shoes, no backpack, so he wasn't home, and there was no car in the driveway either. The only reason my dad would be gone right now would be to pick him up. Satisfied, I turned back for the stairs, when I heard my little brother's voice ring out, "Quinny, Quinny, come up." This time every hair on my body stood on end. It just didn't make sense. He had to be at practice, and if he really needed me, he would have come to me. I go to the base of the second floor stairs and called out to him one more time. "Reese, what's going on? Are you okay?" For a minute, no answer. "Reese, I'm really busy. Can you tell me what's up?" It's quiet for way too long as I stared up the dark staircase. Logically, I had no reason to believe anyone was up there, until I heard Reese's voice calmly speak this time and not call out in his sing-song way those same 4 words. "Quinny, Quinny, come up." "What?" I asked under my breath. I couldn't comprehend the situation. I did quick inventory of any probable scenario. Break-in? Wrong voice. A prank? I would have seen something at this point. It had to be Reese, and maybe helping him would make me a good brother. So I began up the stairs. My heart pounded with each step, and I was about to make the landing to the dark second floor. Then I heard the buzz of the garage door motor. I ran back down the stairs and looked out the window. It was my father's sedan, and him and my little brother got out. I stumbled from the window to the hall where they would enter, and I felt my heart almost stop beating. I collapsed on the floor and just started to cry uncontrollably. This was like 15 years ago now when I was a kid. I was with my best friend Jackson at some abandoned family resort or bungalow colony type place in New York. It was off a main road and then down a private dirt path driveway entrance, and it was a rather large property with a bunch of old abandoned buildings including at least 10 small bungalows, a main hall, a few bathroom stations, and an indoor pool house. Along with that was an outdoor pool, a shuffleboarding area, and a kid's playground. Everything was old, run down, and with tall, overgrown grass growing over it. We found this place accidentally one time walking down Route 209, but we didn't explore it that day. We came back another night. By the time we went, it was past sunset. The sun was kissing the sky goodnight. It was getting very dark, but we didn't want to come during the day in fear of getting caught and getting charged with trespassing. We brought along walkie-talkies and flashlights with us to communicate to each other when we'd split up. We started looking around the bungalows together. Most of them looked the same and were relatively small. 1 or 2 beds each, a small kitchen, and 1 bathroom each. Some of them had these little living room areas. Halfway looking through these bungalows, I split off from Jackson because he was moving kind of slow. I tried to enter the building that looked to be the main hall or office or something, but every entrance was locked. I walkie-talkied Jackson to tell him that the big building was locked. He didn't walkie-talkie back. I wondered if I was out of range from where he was. 2 minutes later, I found myself at one of the 2 bathroom buildings. It was probably a 400 square foot building. There were no doors to the building though. It was unusual. It just had 2 big openings, one for the men's room, one for the women's room. I remember the signs being faded and worn out looking. Then I saw these red tracks on the dirty old concrete bathroom floor. Now I'm not going to sit here and say they looked like bloody footprints, but I couldn't explain what these red marks could be then, and I still can't say for certain now. Regardless, it was pitch black inside that bathroom around that corner, and that was the first building I was scared to enter. I tried walkie-talkieing to Jackson again, hoping he was in range this time. I pressed the button on the walkie and said, "Yo, where are you?" When I let go, I heard the beep sound that the receiving walkie makes after getting a message from inside the bathroom. It gave me a near heart attack. Then I thought Jackson must already be in there, hence the red-looking footsteps. I called his name, and it echoed into the bathroom. I was actually about to step into the bathroom thinking he was hiding from me, pranking me, when I heard Jackson's voice call out from the distance behind me, outside in the darkness of the night. I heard him getting closer. Couldn't see him in the dark, but he obviously saw my light, so I yelled back, "I found your walkie-talkie." I started stepping into the bathroom, but then he said back, "Don't go in there, I never went in there." This is when I turned around and hurried right out of there. I pressed and released the talk button really quick on my walkie, causing the beep again from inside that pitch-black women's room. Jackson and I looked at each other for half a second, then began dashing in the direction we came. We made it back to Route 209 and had to stop to catch our breaths. This is when Jackson told me that inside one of the bungalows he went into, he tried walkie-talkieing me, but I wasn't answering, meaning we must have been out of range. But then he heard a noise from the living area of the bungalow. As he turned around, his flashlight revealed an older woman almost running towards him. He dropped his walkie-talkie and flashlight and ran out from the bungalow. He ran in the dark and hid. refraining from making noise in fear of being followed. He hid for a questionable amount of time before looking around and seeing my flashlight across the field, over at the bathrooms. The most likely explanation to me was that some cracked-out drug addict was hiding or living in that abandoned bungalow and for whatever reason lunged at Jackson and picked up his walkie-talkie. What she was doing in that bathroom, who knows? Maybe drugs, maybe the bathroom in the bungalow didn't work. But what I don't know is why was there a trail of what looked like blood in there? Those are my theories, but I can't explain all of it away. And that's the scariest part.
I'm a police officer in South Jersey. I've been doing this since I was 23. For the most part, it's not as exciting as it's cracked up to be. Not a whole lot happens in my county. Usually the worst calls are disturbance calls or an occasional shoplifting, with something a little more serious sprinkled in there once in a blue moon. I've done just about every possible shift there is. I did my time on the night shift, and there were definitely some weirder calls during the night shift than the day shift. But this one time I was working the night shift, I didn't get any calls. I was just cruising on a quiet road with no streetlights and woods on both sides. I saw the reflection of taillights suddenly approaching on the right-hand side of the road on the grass. As I got closer, I saw that the driver's side door was open. I started to veer onto the grass as I slowed down, fully planning on getting out to see if the driver needed assistance. I saw someone step out of the car, stand by the door for a second, then started to run into the woods. I radioed the codes for a suspicious person or vehicle, then got out of the car with my flashlight on and my hand on my holster just in case. In this situation, I had to expect the worst. I got to the front door of the car and looked inside, half expecting to see someone else sitting in there, but the car seemed empty. There was a seriously foul odor emanating from inside the car though. It smelled like a rotting animal. I called out to the woods, asking if anybody's there and needs assistance, and I stepped to the tree line, waving the flashlight around. I went back to the car to take a closer look inside the passenger side. There were multiple bloodied tissues and paper towels on the floor on the passenger side, as well as the rear seats. They were soaked in blood. The entire papers were dark red. At some point while looking inside the car, I heard footsteps inside the woods. I spun around with my flashlight and yelled, "Come out of the woods." I didn't see anyone. Someone was hiding in there, and that was confirmed when I heard a deep voice somewhere beyond the trees and shrubs. I had no idea what the voice said. I responded saying, "Show yourself, are you hurt?" I prepared to unholster my gun as I walked a little closer. I repeated myself, asking, "Are you hurt?" No response. The voice I heard before didn't sound like a person in pain bleeding out. Additionally, why would they run into the woods upon seeing a police car? Something was way off. I went back to the car and requested assistance. I noticed as I investigated the car further that it had no plates, and when I went back inside of the rear, I found something that made me almost puke from shock. There was something heavy wrapped in bloodied paper towel. I unwrapped it with my gloves on to find a severed hand, and it took me a hot second to realize what it was, because it was completely dark red soaked in blood. Now this situation went from a 5 to a 10. I radioed that there was a possible murder and needed backup. I now put my cruiser's lights on to help other officers more easily identify my location. When backup arrived, we did a thorough search of the woods, looking for possible blood trails. Nothing though. There were not even any blood trails leading from the car, which meant that the hand and blood on the tissues I found may not have been from the person who I saw run into the woods. Eventually the canine unit had to come and search for the person. Hours upon hours went into this search, well past dawn, turning up nothing. The vehicle was taken into custody. It had been reported stolen by a resident of a nearby town, who said he had no idea who could have stolen his car. Fingerprints had been collected from the steering wheel, and DNA testing had been done on the hand. There was not a single match to anybody in the database. To this day, there was never any progress in finding out who the driver of that car was and whose severed hand that was. My partner and I are assigned to a unit in the sheriff's department that handles tethers, or ankle monitors. One night while looking for someone that absconded the program, we followed her last known location to a somewhat shady area of our county. Not many stops are routine, but this one was unsettling from the beginning. My partner walked to the front door, as I held the side of the house, keeping my focus on him and the side of the house. After knocking on the door, we could hear movement from inside. As the door opened, a middle-aged woman slowly peered out of the door and looked directly at me. There was no way she knew where I was standing. I was not in view of any window at the front or side of the house. What was strange was that most people would answer the person at the front door, not look at the side of the house first. After a moment, she let us in after we asked if she knew who Camille was, who we were searching for. She mumbled something to the effect that she was there. Things went from 0 to 100 immediately, as she dropped to her hands and knees and started scooting on the floor yelling for Camille. This lady had some obvious mental issues, and we figured this Camille was a caretaker of some kind. We both knew the situation was off, but started searching the house. The entire time this woman was yelling for Camille, never once getting back to her feet, just kind of following us on the ground. The time must have been around 8 p.m. and it was dark outside. The inside of the home had one light on. There were no TVs or any electronics of any kind. The house had a strange feeling to it. The layout of this older style home had about 4 bedrooms and 2 floors. Every time I left a room, I swear I was in a part of the house I had not just been in. I would enter a hallway and seemingly be in another part of the house, like I entered a dimensional gap or something. The woman would sometimes be right behind me without making a sound. I was starting to question how all of this was possible. At one point, we both entered the upstairs, which looked to be a regular upstairs with bedrooms, or maybe a bathroom at the top of the stairs. As we tried to open the door, initially it would not budge. It appeared that it had been sealed somehow, like it had been painted over, and paint had dried in the seams of the door. After putting in a little extra effort, the door opened, revealing an attic, not bedrooms. If you remember Paranormal Activity, when the guy finds a picture of his wife and child in the insulation, that's what it looked like. There was nothing but storage space, insulation, and an older style light bulb with a string hanging from it. The lady was just sitting at the bottom of the stairs watching us, occasionally yelling for Camille. After what seemed like an hour of searching this house over and over again, going into rooms I swear I had just left, we called it and cleared the property. As we drove off, the woman was now standing right in front of the door, staring at us as we left. According to when we called dispatch and when we cleared, we were only there for 20 minutes. It felt like we were there for well over an hour or two. I don't know what was more unsettling, the fact that it was late at night, the lady yelling Camille's name and scooting on her hands and knees, her quietly showing up behind me when I had not heard her move, or the fact that she was standing at the door just staring at us as we left. We have not returned to that house. My family and I live throughout the middle of Georgia. Not many stories come out of this area, and this one I'm about to share makes us glad of that fact. My cousin, who I'll call Bob, has been a police officer for 5 years. He went into the force bright-eyed and optimistic, I guess like so many do. It sounds corny, but he genuinely wanted to make a difference and help improve the lives of the people in his community. One day, they got an alert from a house somewhere between Macon and Roberta. To hear Bob tell it, it was a place that people had thought was abandoned for years. Gives you an idea of the state the house was in. Anyway, when they arrived, an older gentleman was sitting on the steps outside the front door with his hand in his pockets. Bob and the other officer approached him and were alarmed to see that the man was crying. Well, not crying really, but sobbing, and he was also muttering something to himself about how awful it is. They tried to question the man, but the guy was completely incoherent. It didn't take but a couple of seconds to figure out that the poor guy was traumatized. As his partner called for another car, Bob drew his gun and decided to enter the house. The smell inside the house was overpoweringly rancid. He told me that the kitchen and living room were a total wreck.
It was clear the owners of the house were hoarders. Pots and pans stacked damn near to the ceiling, spoiled food all over the table, takeout containers scattered all over the floor. Disgusting. As procedure dictates, Bob called out to see if anyone would answer. Silence. He told me that even with all his training and experience over those past 5 years, his heart rate was already building fast. Gun at the ready, he checked out the living room and saw nobody was there either. He made his way down the hall where the smell was getting much worse. Just as it all became too much, he covered his mouth and nose and opened the door to what he suspected was the bedroom. In the bed were 2 corpses, gray-skinned and covered with flies. Despite his churning stomach, Bob decided to go in for a closer look, a decision he said he's regretted since. One of the corpses was male, the other female. The skin on their faces was already starting to fall off, and the flies were flying in and out of their mouths. Some were landing and sitting on their eyeballs. As Bob inspected the female's corpse, he was horrified to find that she was holding an even smaller dead body, an infant. It wasn't until a large cockroach crawled out of the dead infant's mouth that Bob ran outside the house, doubled over, and threw up his lunch all over the steps the man had been sitting on. When the other cars finally arrived, they were able to do a more thorough inspection. The older man that Bob and his partner had met when they first arrived was a former coworker and friend of the dead man. They'd worked together at a peach packing company. The man hadn't showed up for over a week, and he'd gone to their house to see if he was okay. The poor man had been the first to see that horrible sight in the bedroom. The story that they put together was that the wife and husband had at some point become addicted to opioids. After some kind of operation a year or so before, they had started abusing painkillers together, and the addiction grew and grew until they started shooting up and snorting heroin. Their daughter, who wasn't more than a couple years old, had died of neglect. When the husband and wife discovered their baby's corpse, they finally broke completely and decided to end themselves. The coroner found enough heroin in both their bodies to kill them twice over. Bob's still on the force, but he started drinking a little too much after that. He's been going to therapy, and he's since managed to get his drinking under control. But almost every time we talk, he says that he still has nightmares about that poor child's corpse. And in his nightmares, the baby's still crying. I once responded to a call of a possible breaking and entering. A young woman living alone called in fear, saying that she came home to find a broken window downstairs, but nothing seemed to be stolen and she couldn't find anyone inside. But then when she went upstairs to bed, she thought she could hear footsteps moving around downstairs. Her call disconnected shortly after she said that, and the woman wouldn't pick up to any of the attempted callbacks. I took the call and arrived to the little house. I went to knock on the front door, and after a minute, I gave it another set of knocks and pressed the doorbell. After another minute, I tried one more time, this time banging really loudly and ringing the bell again. When there was no answer this time, I decided to inspect the house. I walked around the house, and I found the busted window. It was a window big enough to crawl through with ease. I stuck my head into the dark house and yelled, "It's the police." It was silent. I radioed to dispatch that the house seemed silent. More officers were en route, but I didn't feel right waiting around in case there was someone truly in danger in the house. I radioed that I'm going into the house through the window, and then I climbed through it. I stepped over the shattered glass into the kitchen. I drew my gun and started walking through the kitchen, hearing the glass crunching below my boots. I shouted into the house to make my presence as a police officer known to anyone who was inside. I didn't hear any footsteps, so I went upstairs, as the woman on the phone told dispatch that she heard footsteps downstairs, so that would mean her bedroom was upstairs. I wasn't trying to be too quiet as I went up the stairs, but I also wasn't stomping around. I didn't know what to expect, if someone with a weapon was in the house, or if the woman was just alone in bed. I said, "Ma'am, it's a police officer. Are you here?" And I heard back a soft female voice from upstairs saying yes. I followed the voice to one of the bedrooms, where I saw a woman sitting up in her bed under the covers. She looked at me, and I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. I noticed a slight tremble in her voice. I kept the lights to the bedroom off as I looked at her. There was enough natural moonlight in the room that I could examine her facial expression. She looked distressed. I told her I was responding to her phone call, and then I asked her why she hung up and didn't pick up the callbacks. She stuttered and said no one is here. I caught on to what was going on. I looked at the closet and made a slight head nod to her. She very slightly shook her head no. I looked down under the bed and pointed, and she shook her head yes. The weight of the pressure of what to do next was 1,000 pounds. The best idea I came up with on the spot was telling her, "All right, ma'am, I just need you to sign this report form stating that I was here and there was nothing unusual." She said okay and got up from the bed and came over to me. And when she was close enough, I pushed her out of the room and then drew my gun and yelled, "Come out from under the bed." I was still shook when I saw a dark figure actually slowly coming out from under the bed. I said, "Hands first and drop any weapons." I heard the clank of something drop to the floor, which turned out to be a gun. A middle-aged man in all black clothes stepped out from under the bed with his hands up. I made the arrest on the spot and brought him outside, right around the time the other officers were arriving. The woman had hung up the phone on the police when she thought the footsteps were upstairs and she didn't want the intruder to hear the audio from the phone call. This was also why she didn't pick up the phone, because by this point the intruder entered the room and had her at gunpoint. And since the police were already coming, for whatever reason, instead of fleeing the scene, the intruder threatened to shoot the woman if she made a sound when the police came. After I had rung the bell, he hid under the bed and told her to pretend he wasn't there. I'm glad I was able to catch on to the situation. It could have gone a number of ways if I hadn't.
Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert.
Before being taken on as a full-time teacher at a high school a little outside of Austin, Texas, I was a substitute. I would sub in for a multitude of classes, with my main subject area being math classes. Being a sub, I would most days have a lot more off periods, of course, since I would work more on an as-needed basis. This was on a day that started like any other. I had 4 classes I would be subbing for that day. They were all the math classes that a specific teacher would teach, including geometry and algebra. I would usually enjoy subbing for science classes, as the teachers would usually just have me show the class an educational documentary and then hand out a question sheet which would be handed in at the end of the class to be graded. With math though, you'd actually have to teach the material as a sub. I arrived to school and picked up the keys from the front office to the 2 classrooms I'd be subbing in that day. Both classes were in the math hallway, which was downstairs to the far left of the school. The periods I was teaching that day were something like 2, 3, 7, and 9. I had already taught the first 2 classes, so I had about an hour and a half before the 7th period class I'd be teaching. During most of this time, I stayed in the classroom of the last class I just subbed for since it was empty for the next 2 periods. I was doing a mix of work-related and non-work-related things on my laptop. Period 6 there would be another class here, so I'd migrate to the teacher's lounge by the back of the school. After the second bell rang and period 6 began, I was walking the empty halls to the teacher's lounge. I'd been in the lounge multiple times, and honestly, it would usually be subs sitting in there, if anyone. The teacher's lounge is pretty much in the back corner of the school, by a separate back entrance that's only unlocked from the outside by teachers' ID cards. I set my belongings down on a table in the empty teacher's lounge, and this was when I heard knocks at the back exit door. I went out to the hall and to the doors, where I saw a clean-cut looking man with gray short hair and a button-down shirt tucked into khakis, with a black jacket over all of it. He looked like a teacher. He saw me through the glass and smiled and asked me to open the door. I asked if he were a teacher here. He said, "Yes, my name's Mr. Abrams. I don't have my ID on me today." I opened the door for him, and he thanked me and quickly walked past me. I noticed that now he had his hand in his right pocket. He had some serious movement in his step. He seemed to know where he was going. Actually, he was going in the direction of the math hallway. I suddenly felt like I may have made a mistake letting him in without ID. I rushed to my laptop and pulled up the staff directory, which was accessible to all employees of the school. I looked up Mr. Abrams. There was not a single teacher at any of the schools, elementary to high school, with the last name Abrams. I had no choice but to call the front office and let them know that I think someone pretending to be a teacher had entered the building. This was taken seriously as the school issued a lockdown immediately, sending every classroom an automatic distress call to lock all doors and turn off all lights immediately. I heard a commotion from out in the math hallway. I walked out into the hall, a little closer, and I could hear bangs or kicks on a door, and a man screaming at the top of his lungs, "Maria, open up, and I know you're in there." Maria was the first name of the teacher I was subbing for that day, and I couldn't tell for sure, but I believe the door he was kicking on was one of the classrooms I subbed in that day. Police had surrounded the school in literally minutes, and had entered from multiple entrances and detained the man. I didn't witness it happen. It was down in the intersecting hallway, and I wasn't allowed past the police. The teacher I subbed for, who I changed the name for her privacy, had called out of work that week, originally alleging she was very sick. The man who came to the school banging on the door was apparently her ex-husband, and as far as rumor has it, Maria did something horrible to him. Not much of a rumor, because clearly that would be the case if he came to the school with a gun. Everyone's guess is he came to kill her and then himself. No one knew where Maria went to hide from her ex, or what the full story was, but she didn't return to work for months. I pray to God all the time thanking him that no one was hurt or killed, because I was the one to let him in, and that would have forever sat on my conscience. This story is told in the perspective of a college-aged female. I attend university in Massachusetts. I currently live off campus in my final year here, but this took place when I was a freshman living in the dorms. Freshmen are on the first floor of every building on campus. This was the winter semester. It was a freezing cold day. I just finished up my last class around 5 p.m. Our professor let us out really early. It was already dark out as I was walking back to my dorm. On my walk back, I got a text from the university. The text started in all capitals saying, "Attention all faculty and staff, get to a safe building immediately," as a suspicious man was walking around campus approaching women with crude, threatening comments and telling them he had a gun. The text mentioned that university police were aware of the issue and were on full alert, looking to find the man. I picked up the pace in my step to get back to my dorm building. I started looking behind me every few seconds, and suddenly noticed someone walking not that far behind me. It was a black man in a huge winter coat. I couldn't gauge his age from this distance. But also, he could have just been a student. At that point, I was being paranoid. Plus, the text didn't specify the person's race. I rushed to my building, and when I got there, I let myself in. To get into any dorm buildings on campus, you need to use your student ID cards. I entered the building. The first door shut, then I opened the second door. That's when a loud bang at the first door made me jump. It was that man from behind me before. He was asking if I could open the door. I was about to ignore him, but then he said, "Please, I'm cold." I turned to look at him, and he had this pleading kind of expression on his face. I asked, "Do you live here? What's your room number?" He said yes, he's on the 3rd floor, but he ignored my asking his room number twice. I said, "Sorry, I can't let you in." This is when he started saying vulgar, horrible shit that I don't want to repeat. He started licking the glass and commenting about what he's gonna do to me as soon as he gets into the building. In disgust, I ran to my room and slammed the door behind me. I turned on the lights as it was pitch black inside and my roommate wasn't back yet. I texted my dorm group chat saying I think the creepy man the school sent a warning about was at the front door of the dorm building. Don't come anywhere near. Everyone replied the same thing. OMG, call university police. That's what I did. I got the number off the website and called them. Told them right away the creepy man with a gun was at our dorm building. When they asked if he was still there, naturally I walked to the window to look outside. I screamed at the top of my lungs for 3 seconds when I saw the man on the other side of the glass, smiling, shaking his head, doing this disgusting motion with his tongue. I pleaded with the officer on the line to send the police there now. The man on the other side of the glass took off running, and he disappeared into the darkness as soon as he was beyond the light of the light posts. I still cried for the police to hurry, and as soon as one of them got to my dorm room, I let him in and described what the man looked like. He told me to stay in my room and don't leave again for the night. He advised I tell all my friends in the building to do the same. An additional text was sent out to all residents of my building. The hunt for that man went all night apparently. They never found him. The things he said to me were beyond disturbing. I didn't see a gun on him, but honestly anything could have been in his massive coat pockets. The campus had extra police on duty the rest of the week. When I was in 2nd grade, Each day of the week, we'd have a different extracurricular activity at some point in the day. I think it went Mondays was art class, Tuesdays was music class, Wednesday was library day, and so on. By second grade, kids were allowed to walk to the bathroom unattended as long as they got permission and took the special hall pass item chosen by the teacher of the class. For the art class, it was this big green plastic crayon that was meant as the bathroom pass. I remember this memory almost vividly, which makes it all the more disturbing when I think about it. Honestly, I was kind of a weird kid when I was in elementary school. I did have some social issues that I don't think ever got diagnosed, but I would sometimes just do weird things. Case in point, we were never supposed to just take the bathroom pass and leave the classroom without asking first. But during art class, as our teacher was going around the class helping the students out with our little creations, I got up and took the plastic crayon and walked out the classroom door to go to the bathroom. The bathroom was all the way down the hall. I go inside, and as a kid, I was the type to pee sitting down. So I went to the stall and sat on the toilet seat. This was when I heard the loudspeaker outside the bathroom, that the school was going into lockdown. My heart started to race. I was outside of the classroom during a lockdown. I was terrified. I don't remember if I finished peeing or not, but I know I got right off the toilet seat and went outside back into the hall. I was scared I was going to get in trouble. I saw all of the classroom doors were shut with their blinds down and lights off already. I was too late. I saw a man walking down the hallway. I assumed it was a teacher, even though he wasn't dressed like one. I had the wits of a second grader, so I said, "Excuse me, I'm locked out of my classroom." I remember vividly, he said back, "Oh, that's all right, come with me, I know where to go." He grabbed my hand and we started walking in what seemed to be the direction of the back exit. That's when I heard a familiar woman's voice keep screaming Troy, my name, from behind us. It was my art teacher, Miss Green. She screamed at the man to get off me and grabbed me by the arm and tugged at me back to the art classroom. Once inside, she locked the door and scolded me quietly. I remember seeing the worry in her eyes. She might have even been crying. The lockdown continued for another half hour at least. The whole time, I was confused, scared, and most of all embarrassed by all the stares my classmates were giving me. The principal came on the loudspeaker eventually and said the lockdown was over. When my art teacher got on the phone with, I assumed, the front office, I think whatever she said was what prompted the faculty to end the school day early. I'm so grateful for Miss Green. She really put herself in danger and saved me from something horrible, whether it be from kidnapping to any amount of emotional trauma. This happened to me when I was a junior in high school, around April or May of 2019. I live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but for privacy reasons, I'll leave out the school name. I played the double bass in our school wind ensemble, and every morning we had rehearsal in the band hall. We were about halfway through rehearsal when I heard a knock on the band hall door, which opened to the outside. I don't think anyone else heard the knock because we were in the middle of performing a song, and I was standing with my double bass on the perimeter of the ensemble, along with the percussionists, so I was closer to the door. Before anyone could say anything or react, one of the percussionists who I knew just blindly went over to the door and opened it for the person outside. We had been repeatedly told by the band directors to never open that door for anyone on the outside unless it was a student, and even the students had to show their student ID badges through the window before being let in. But we still have to open that door a lot for other students as it locks on its own. So he probably just opened it without thinking and didn't look through the window. As soon as he opened the door, the person forcefully came in and walked to within 15 to 20 feet from where I was standing. It was a middle-aged Latino man, about 5'6", wearing a gray hoodie and cargo shorts. I immediately noticed that the guy had both of his hands in his hoodie, with what appeared to be a heavy object. The band director saw him first and immediately stopped conducting, and the rest of the band turned their heads around to see what was going on. The band director asked with a nervous but forceful tone, "Can I help you?" The man replied in broken English, "Yes, I came to check out my daughter." The band director asserted, "This is not where you check out students, you shouldn't be here." The man then asked where he should go to check out his daughter, and to my surprise, the band director directed him to go out the band hall double doors and make a right down the school's main hallway to the front office. The man thanked the director and quickly walked out of the band hall into the school. During this whole conversation, I had my double bass turned in the man's direction and stood behind it so that it would maybe somewhat shield me from any bullets. After the man had disappeared down the hallway, the entire orchestra was speechless for a minute or so, processing what just happened. The director immediately called the school security, and within a minute or so, the school was on lockdown. The director turned off all the lights in the band hall, and we all crammed inside whatever tuba lockers we could find. A whole 5 minutes passed until 2 armed security guards came running full speed through the band hall in the direction that the man had gone. Another 10 or so minutes passed and the lockdown was over. The school never came out with an official statement of the event, nor could I even find any local news articles about it. I suppose the school was trying to keep the whole thing a secret, for such a stupid breach of security would certainly damage its reputation. But I later heard from multiple other students that the man had just committed an armed robbery somewhere near the school and was fleeing on foot from the police when he decided to take refuge in the school, pretending to pick up his daughter. I also heard that he was found with a gun on him, which explains the heavy object I noticed in his hoodie pocket. The fact that I was standing literally 15 or so feet from an armed intruder inside of a school for a whole 2 minutes still terrifies me to this day. Although I know the band director was probably trying to keep his cool so as not to piss the guy off and cause him to shoot all of us or something, I still think he made a huge mistake by directing the man to go further into the school instead of telling him to go back outside and enter the school through the front door like every other parent or visitor has to. Had that man had worse intentions, that situation could have ended tragically. I'm glad I'm not in high school anymore, because now I know firsthand how easily such things could happen at the hands of a careless mistake. This experience was short and to the point. I was a very young child in Catholic private school. I was in the 4th grade. Our school would routinely practice lockdown drills. I think once every couple of weeks we'd have one. All of us in the class were always excited for them. For some reason as kids we just found it to be fun. It's all a joke when you're that young. Half the kids don't even realize what you're practicing for, and the other half who do don't ever expect a real lockdown to happen. One day it did though. Over the intercom came a voice from the front office saying, "We're going into lockdown, this is not a drill." I remember some kids still laughed at the announcement, as if it were cool to hear that we're going into lockdown. No one could have prepared for what came next. As our teacher seemed concerned and rushed to shut the door on the lights and yelled at us to get in the corner, I think that's when everyone realized this wasn't just a regular lockdown drill. Something serious was going on. We all huddled in the corner of the room. Each door had a narrow glass window which could be looked through. Suddenly the silence was broken by crazed screaming from the halls. It was one lone male's voice. It was just incoherent screaming. The man was chanting something. The screams got closer, and I remember how scared we all started to get. The screams got closer until they were right outside our classroom door, and then bangs on the door made a bunch of us scream and cry. The man on the other side of the door screamed, "Your God is dead. Jesus didn't die for your sins. You're all gonna burn." Our teacher tried his best to calm us down as the screams intensified, and the man started to yell, "I hear you in there. I see you. Open up the door." The man screamed words I didn't understand at the time, but I believe looking back he was screaming Islamic phrases and shaming our religion. I was too young to put it all together immediately. The bangs on our door stopped, and the screams continued further down the hall away from the door, but they could still be heard. The crazed man continued through the halls. The man's screams were overpowered eventually by the yells of other men. There was a huge commotion in the halls during what I presume to be the moment he was taken down by police or security. We had to stay in the lockdown position for a long time even after this. After a while, the lockdown was over, and the school day was cut short. Parents were called to pick up their children. Luckily, my mom didn't work, so she was able to come pick me up right away. It was a bit of a scarring experience. We were all so young that we didn't even understand the gravity and freakishness of the situation. I'm just glad no one got hurt. I used to work at a Walmart. The Walmart I worked at was open 24 hours back then. Due to my kid's school schedule, I would work overnight shifts so that I would be available to drop him off and pick him up. I would do a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift every night. During the day I'd sleep, take care of my son, and work my second job some days. I was exhausted a lot during this time in my life. It wasn't a great time. I had to do what I could to cover rent though. This Walmart was one of the bigger ones. It was a super center, not just a grocery store, so it had everything. It was one of the few open 24 hours around here. I think COVID changed that though. When I got there around 10 this one cold night, there was still a decent amount of shoppers in the store. A lot of people would come in for some late night shopping. As the hours would pass, it would of course quiet down tremendously. The late hours of the night would attract a lot of weirder characters, weirder than the usual ones during the day. Into the AM hours of the night, there was only one person working the front of the store, and he or she would be at the self-checkout registers. There were no regular registers open this late. There would also be a couple of stock workers on the floor, which was what I did. Then there would be a couple warehouse workers in the back, who I really didn't ever interact with. They did their own thing. And then there's just the night manager on duty. I was in the cereal aisle doing my usual stock work. I noticed a customer walk past the aisle, then seconds later he stepped back into view at the end of the aisle, stopped, and looked down at me. When I looked back at him, he started looking at the cereal. The guy had curly hair. I couldn't gauge his ethnicity honestly. He had a black backpack on that looked like it was stuffed to the brim with God knows what. He awkwardly lingers in the cereal aisle for a minute, apparently looking at the granola bars. Then he came a little closer to me and asked me where the bread is. I pointed him in the right direction. He said thanks and slowly walked away out of the aisle. I watched him walk away, and he had a very noticeable waddle in his walk. When he was out of sight, he was out of mind though. The problem was that he wasn't out of sight for long. I was in the cereal aisle for quite some time, and I started noticing that every few minutes that guy would slowly pass by the aisle looking down in this direction. He wasn't holding anything. He didn't get any bread. He just had on his big sketchy backpack. I started working faster just so I could finish this aisle and move away from him. When I was done, I brought the empty U-boat platform back to the warehouse, where I grabbed another U-boat full of boxes ready to stock. I purposely picked an aisle far away from the cereal aisle. I was now in the chips aisle. This is also about 45 minutes after initial contact with that guy, so there should have been no way he was still here. But I was wrong. He found me. I was rotating the newer bags of chips behind the older ones on the shelf, and then I looked to my right, and that guy was at the end of the aisle, creeping again. He still had nothing in his hands. This man had been creeping around the store for almost an hour. He then finally approached me as I was dreading he would. I tried to look away until he started to speak. I don't remember word for word what he said, but basically, he said that he's been checking me out, and he couldn't resist coming up to me telling me how beautiful I am. I responded as politely as I could. I did a fake little laugh and said, "No, thank you, that's very sweet." He didn't stop there though. He asked a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from. I gave fake answers to everything. This guy absolutely reeked, and his breath was awful. I was genuinely repulsed. He asked for my number, and I said I'm seeing someone. He said there's nothing wrong with us just being friends. To get him to leave me alone, I gave him a fake number. I then told him I really can't be talking to anyone while I'm working. He made some creepy comment before walking away, thinking he was all suave that he got my number, when in reality he was genuinely creepy and I gave him a fake number. I thought that would be the end of it. Hours went by, and time felt like it was going in reverse. I wanted to go home. Then, the only other stock worker on the job at that hour suddenly walkie-talkied me, saying there's some creepy-looking guy asking for me. I said, "Oh no," and then told her to tell him I left. I then basically made a beeline for the employee lounge, where I planned on hiding for a while. I made it to the lounge and then sat in one of the seats. Then the double doors opened, and in came that guy. He looked at me, and he looked angry. He yelled, "You gave me a fake number, you bitch." I think I swallowed my gum out of fear. I said, "You can't be back here, sir." He then took off his backpack and plopped it on the table next to mine. He started unzipping it as he looked at me. That's when it was time for me to go. I got up and ran past him without thinking. He tried to grab my arm, but he failed. As I ran through the store, I looked back and saw he was running after me. I ran to the front of the store and outside to my car. It was the only thing I could think to do in the moment. Alternatively, I could have tried finding the male warehouse workers in the back, or even the manager, but that was no guarantee. I got to my car and saw the man leave the Walmart looking for me. He was slow. He must have been on something. He saw my car, but it was too late. I was already driving away. I called the night manager and let him know what just went down, and that I'm not comfortable staying there tonight. I also warned him of the man with the backpack full of unknown contents. My manager told me I can't leave the place short-staffed. He said he'd call the police to make sure the man doesn't come back, and he told me to come back. I was adamant about not returning that night, though. He eventually got the message and said he'd review the camera footage, but that I need to come back tomorrow night. And I did. He allegedly notified the police the next day of the man and gave the police department the surveillance footage. I met a lot of characters working that job, but this guy was by far the scariest. I don't know what he was reaching for in his backpack. I don't want to either. I was 14 when this happened. There's a Walmart that's walking distance to my house. I used to sometimes go there to buy clothing and such before I was of driving age, since it was so close. Sometimes I'd go with my friend Emily, sometimes I'd just go alone. The Walmart is part of the nearby mall, but the mall kind of stinks now. Most of the good stores have closed over the years. Plus, I wasn't made of money when I was 14, and Walmart is cheap. One night I walked to Walmart with my AirPods in. It's a 15-minute walk. When I put my AirPods in, I shut out everything else around me. I feel like most people with basic social awareness know that if someone's wearing headphones, it means they don't want to have to take them out to talk to you. I was minding my business in Walmart in the girls' clothing department when I noticed a guy next to me saying something. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it looked like he was talking to me. I took out my AirPods, and I said, "Are you talking to me?" He said yes. He was this shorter man with gray hair who looked like 50. He had glasses and a clean-shaven face. He smiled and said, "Sorry, I didn't see your headphones." Sure he didn't. He said he was just telling me how his daughter buys the same exact kind of jeans I was wearing. I had no idea why he was telling me this, but I'm a very polite person to everybody. I always have been. So I chose to be kind to him by laughing and saying, "Oh, that's funny." That should have been the end of an interaction that didn't need to happen, but of course this wouldn't be a story if it was. I was still looking through this rack of tops as the man kept trying to talk to me. He mistook my kindness for actual interest in talking to him clearly. He asked my age and I said 14, and his response was unsettling. He basically said, "Oh, what a great age. So mature, but still so young." He asked my name, and for some reason I actually gave him my real name. And his response to my name was, "Wow, that's my favorite name for a girl." Next up, he asked what school I went to, and around now was when I decided to start making things up. I said I'm actually not from around here, I'm just visiting my cousin. He couldn't let it go though, and he persisted, asking where I'm from. I said I'm from out of state, keeping it vague. But then he said, "I've seen you around here before. Are you sure you're not from around here?" I looked at him and tried to think of a response, but instead, I ended up turning around and walking away from him. I was for the first time ever actually made very uncomfortable by a stranger. The way he said he's seen me before made me feel as though he'd been watching me or paid attention to me in this Walmart before. I went to buy the jeans I was holding at the front of the Walmart. Then I walked through the store to enter the mall. It was November or December, and they had just put up the Christmas decorations, so I wanted to walk through. And I also wanted to see if any new stores opened, since my shopping in Walmart was cut short. I walked through the mall with really nothing catching my eye. I went into a Victoria's Secret, and while inside of there, I saw through the glass that guy from Walmart sitting on a bench in the mall outside of the Victoria's Secret. I left the store and started walking very quickly through the mall. When I turned around and saw he was now walking behind me, I started to panic and called my mom asking her for a ride because I was being followed by a man. I took her advice and waited in a store with multiple people inside. He came to the entrance of the store, and he creepily said my name in this way that he clearly didn't want a lot of people to hear him. I started to feel sick. I went to the cashier and said this man is following me. I don't know him. Some customers overheard and looked over, and the man clearly noticed and started walking away into the mall. The cashier, who was probably only 20 years old herself, sympathized with me. A couple even came over and said they'd wait with me until my mom got here. My mom came into the mall eventually, and I left with her, thanking the couple who waited with me. I didn't go to the mall or that Walmart alone anymore. I didn't even go back with friends for a long time either. I hope that guy got caught being a creep and has been taken off the streets. My worst job ever was working at Walmart. I worked there only for a few months. I hated every minute of it, honestly. I didn't get along with a lot of my coworkers. The customers were crazy and weird, and I felt like a lot of people just generally were unfriendly. I was 24, and Walmart was my second job to make ends meet with my new apartment. Sometimes I'd work register, sometimes I'd work the desk outside the fitting room, and sometimes I'd work general sales associate. On this day, I was a general associate, walking around the place assisting customers and straightening things on the shelves. I interacted with a bunch of people that day. I still remember dealing with some of the dumbest customers I'd ever had the displeasure of interacting with, but nothing could have prepared me for who I was going to run into that day. I got a random pat on the back, and I turned around to see my ex-girlfriend Casey. She looked super happy to see me and went in for a hug. I was surprised because she didn't live anywhere near here. I asked what brought her here, and she said she heard through a mutual friend that I started working here recently. Casey and I did not leave off on good terms at all. She had been harassing me for a while since I had broken up with her, and I had to end up blocking her on everything to get her to stop. She was insanely controlling throughout our relationship, and downright obsessive, bipolar, and paranoid. And after I ended things with her, she wouldn't stop trying to contact me and meet up with me to talk things out, even though we had talked things out multiple times. She even left multiple voicemails crying. I take no joy in any of that. I don't say any of this to belittle her or make a joke of mental illness, but she has issues, and I came to learn that, and I had to tell her multiple times her behavior is not normal. Her finding out I got this job and coming to my place of work I was not okay with. Even though I hugged her back and was cordial at first in this interaction, I eventually cut the crap and said, "Why are you here?" The fake friendliness stopped here on both sides. Her face got more serious, and she started telling me that it's really messed up that I block her out of my life like this. I told her this is the exact kind of behavior that made me block her. Showing up to my job is not normal. Then I started asking her which mutual friend told her that I worked here. She claimed that's irrelevant, and I assured her it most certainly is not irrelevant, because I didn't believe that anyone told her where I work. I had broken up with Casey many months ago. She should have had no way of knowing about my new job or apartment, and I was confident none of my friends were even in contact with her anymore. I told her I'm seeing someone else now. I have to get back to work. Please leave and don't contact me again. She refused to leave, so I simply just started walking away to an employees only area. She didn't follow me back there. It was at this moment I actually started considering trying to get a restraining order. After my shift was over, it had to be like 11 p.m., closing time. I left the store and went straight home. My roommate was home, his car was in the driveway. I parked next to him and went inside. I went straight to the kitchen to make myself a late dinner, as I always would after closing shifts. I microwaved some frozen meal and went to the living room to play video games. For a while, this was my only time to unwind and do what I wanted. I played for maybe an hour, then went to bed. I woke up not long after falling asleep. I thought I heard something. I looked up and realized my bedroom door was open. I definitely did not do that. My roommate Paul goes to bed really early because he works early, and there's no chance he'd just get up and randomly open my door. I got up and walked out into the living room. I turned on a lamp and looked around the place. I went over to the front door, and it was unlocked. What the hell was going on? I was thinking, did Paul leave? I looked out the window and saw that his car was still there. I locked the front door. Then I went to his bedroom door and tried opening it. It was locked. I knocked on the door lightly once, and he didn't respond, so he was asleep. I was genuinely confused. I went out front and looked under the pot where we kept a hidden spare key. It wasn't there. My heart was in my throat at this point. The only person in this world besides Paul and my family who knows that I like to hide a spare key outside is Casey. I checked at least 5 times under the pot, even checking the surrounding area on the chance that maybe it was kicked out of place or something. I went back inside the house and shut the front door. I went to the knife holder in the kitchen, and the biggest knife was missing. My phone was still in my bedroom. I had to be smart about this. I tiptoed to my bedroom door until I was close enough to grab the doorknob as fast as I could and slam it shut from the outside. I screamed as loud as I could for Paul. He erupted from his room, obviously confused, and there were suddenly bangs on the bedroom door from the other side, along with Casey's voice saying, "I'm sorry, let's talk." I held the door closed with all my might as she kept trying to pull it open. Paul called the police as I held the door. After a few minutes of this, Casey stopped trying to pull the door open, and she was hysterically crying on the other side of the door. Finally, the police arrived and came inside. I moved away from the door, and the officers made sure Casey dropped the knife before she came out. She was of course arrested, and I didn't even have to press charges. She was charged by the state for, I believe, burglary in the 2nd degree, and she's currently serving a pretty lengthy prison term for this. I'm honestly shocked she didn't get charged for attempted murder. It's a sick situation all around. I don't know when she'll be out. I'll have been long moved out of this place by then. My biggest regret is not catching the red flags with her early on.